The unexpected hanging paradox. A judge sentences a prisoner to be hanged at noon on one of the following 5 weekdays: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. The execution, he declares, will occur unexpectedly. It must come as a surprise to the prisoner. Upon hearing this, the prisoner smugly concludes that the hanging cannot possibly take place. Here's his reasoning. If Friday were the chosen day, the prisoner would know by Thursday evening that the hanging must occur the next day, since no other days remain. Thus, the hanging wouldn't be unexpected. Therefore, Friday is ruled out. By similar logic, Thursday becomes predictable once Wednesday passes, so it too is eliminated. Extending the chain of thought, the prisoner dismisses Wednesday, Tuesday, and finally Monday. Confident in his deduction, he spends the week relaxing, convinced he has escaped his fate. But then, on Wednesday at noon, the guard arrived to carry out the sentence. To the prisoner's astonishment, the hanging truly comes as a surprise. He hadn't anticipated it after all. This is the essence of the unexpected hanging paradox, a self-fulfilling prophecy that defies logical prediction. At first glance, the paradox appears to hinge on faulty reasoning. After all, if the prisoner expects the hanging not to happen, any day it occurs should qualify as unexpected. Yet, the deeper issue lies in the ambiguity of what constitutes surprise. Does unpredictability depend solely on the prisoner's expectations? Or does it involve external factors beyond his control? Philosophers have debated various interpretations of the paradox. One approach emphasizes the role of epistemic uncertainty, the limits of human knowledge. Even if the prisoner believes he has accounted for all possibilities, his reasoning rests on assumptions about the judge's intentions and the reliability of his own logic. By introducing doubt into the system, the paradox underscores the fragility of certainty in complex scenarios. Another perspective frames the paradox as a critique of formal systems. Just as Gödel's incompleteness theorems demonstrate that no axiomatic system can prove all truths within its domain, the unexpected hanging paradox illustrates the limitations of deductive reasoning when applied to dynamic, real-world situations. The prisoner's attempt to reduce the problem to a series of logical steps ultimately backfires, revealing gaps in his model. Interestingly, the paradox extends beyond judicial dilemmas. It reflects common experiences of anticipation and surprise in everyday life. Think about waiting for exam results, job offers, or medical diagnoses. We often try to predict outcomes based on available information, only to be blindsided by events that defy our expectations. The unexpected hanging paradox captures this tension between foresight and unpredictability, reminding us that life rarely adheres to neat logical frameworks. In storytelling, the paradox serves as a device for suspense and irony. Plots centered around characters attempting to anticipate their fates frequently echo its themes of inevitability and surprise. Whether it's a detective racing against time to solve a mystery or a protagonist grappling with an impending disaster, the paradox amplifies the drama by highlighting the unpredictability of the future. From a psychological standpoint, the paradox sheds light on cognitive biases and decision-making processes. Humans tend to overestimate their ability to predict outcomes, especially in uncertain environments. The prisoner's confidence in his reasoning reflects this bias, illustrating how misplaced certainty can lead to erroneous conclusions. Recognizing these tendencies can help us approach uncertainty with greater humility and adaptability. Ultimately, the unexpected hanging paradox challenges us to embrace the unknown. It reminds us that surprises are an inevitable part of life, regardless of how meticulously we plan or analyze. Rather than resisting unpredictability, we might learn to appreciate its capacity to disrupt routine and spark growth. After all, the most memorable moments often arise from the unexpected. The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine a time traveler who journeys back to the 18th century and hands Ludwig van Beethoven a copy of his own symphonies, works that Beethoven has yet to compose. Inspired by these masterpieces, Beethoven studies them, learns from their structure, and proceeds to write them exactly as they appear in the future. The question arises, where did the symphonies originate? They were never truly created. Instead, they seem to exist in an endless loop of cause and effect, with no discernible beginning or end. This is the essence of the bootstrap paradox, a self-contained cycle of events where information, objects, or even people have no identifiable source. The term bootstrap refers to the idea of pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps, a phrase often used to describe impossible feats. In this paradox, the impossibility lies in the circular nature of causality. Unlike linear timelines, where effects follow causes, the bootstrap paradox creates a closed loop. The effect becomes its own cause. It challenges our understanding of creation, originality, and the flow of time itself. To explore this further, let's consider another example. Suppose you are given a watch by your older self during a fleeting encounter. Years later, you travel back in time and give the same watch to your younger self, thus completing the loop. The watch appears to have no origin. It simply exists within the cycle. Who made it? What was it first crafted? These questions have no answers because the object transcends traditional notions of creation and history. The bootstrap paradox raises profound questions about the nature of existence and creativity. If something can exist without being created, what does that say about the act of creation itself? Is innovation merely the rearrangement of pre-existing elements, or does true originality require a starting point? The paradox suggests that some ideas, artifacts, or even individuals may be destined to perpetuate themselves across time, independent of any single creator. In science fiction, the bootstrap paradox is a favorite trope, appearing in works like Doctor Who, Interstellar, and Steins Gate. These stories often use the paradox to explore themes of determinism versus free will. If events are predetermined to repeat themselves, do we truly have agency over our lives? Or are we merely actors in a script written by forces beyond our control? Philosophically, the paradox intersects with debates about eternal recurrence. The idea that history repeats itself infinitely doesn't preclude acknowledging the inevitability of a winner. This pragmatic perspective reconciles individual skepticism with collective inevitability. The lottery paradox also intersects with debates about epistemology, the study of knowledge and belief. It raises questions about what constitutes justified belief and whether rationality demands consistency across all scenarios. If we accept that some beliefs are context-dependent, then the paradox dissolves as a matter of framing rather than substance. In real-world applications, the paradox sheds light on decision-making under uncertainty. Consider medical diagnoses, financial investments, or legal judgments. All involve assessing probabilities and weighing risks. The lottery paradox reminds us that even highly improbable events can occur, and dismissing them outright may lead to flawed conclusions. Balancing caution with openness to unlikely outcomes is crucial for sound reasoning. Culturally, the paradox resonates with themes of hope and resilience. Lotteries themselves symbolize the human tendency to dream big despite daunting odds. Stories of underdogs triumphing against all expectations, from rags to riches tales to sports upsets, mirror the paradoxical blend of doubt and possibility embedded in the lottery scenario. These narratives celebrate the power of perseverance and the unpredictability of fate. Philosophically, the lottery paradox invites reflection on the nature of luck and destiny. Does randomness govern our lives, or do patterns emerge from chaos? Are we mere spectators of chance, or do our choices shape outcomes? Such musings challenge deterministic worldviews, suggesting that uncertainty is an intrinsic part of existence. Ultimately, the lottery paradox teaches us to embrace ambiguity and nuance. It reminds us that rationality isn't always black and white. Sometimes, holding contradictory beliefs provisionally is necessary to navigate complexity. Whether applied to lotteries, life decisions, or existential musings, the paradox encourages us to find harmony between skepticism and faith, and to recognize that even the most improbable dreams deserve a chance. Newcomb's Paradox. You stand before two boxes. Box A, transparent and containing $1,000, and Box B, opaque, whose contents remain unknown. A superintelligent being, known for its flawless predictive abilities, has already decided what to place in Box B based on its prediction of your choice. If it predicted you would take only Box B, it filled it with $1 million. If it predicted you'd take both boxes, it left Box B empty. Now, you must decide. Take only Box B, trusting the predictor's accuracy, or take both boxes, securing at least $1,000 regardless of the prediction. What should you do? This is Newcomb's Paradox, a thought experiment that pits intuition against logic, challenging our understanding of free will, causality, and strategic reasoning. At first glance, the decision seems straightforward. Taking both boxes guarantees at least $1,000, whereas taking only Box B risks walking away empty-handed if the predictor erred. Yet proponents of one-boxing argue that the predictor's near-perfect track record makes trusting its judgment the superior strategy, yielding $1 million instead of $1,000. To explore the paradox further, let's consider the arguments on both sides. Two boxers emphasize dominance reasoning. Regardless of what's in Box B, taking both boxes maximizes your earnings. Since the predictor has already acted, the contents of Box B are fixed, making the additional $1,000 in Box A a guaranteed bonus. One boxer's counter that the predictor's reliability changes the calculus. By choosing only Box B, you align with the prediction, ensuring the higher payout. Ignoring the predictor's prowess, they argue, ignores critical information. The crux of the debate lies in the nature of causality. Two boxers adopt a causal decision theory perspective, focusing solely on actions within their control. They reason that their choice does not retroactively affect the predictor's decision, so maximizing immediate gains is optimal. One boxers, however, lean toward evidential decision theory, considering how their choice serves as evidence of the predictor's foresight. By acting consistently with the prediction, they increase the likelihood of receiving $1 million. Newcomb's paradox extends beyond abstract philosophy, influencing fields like economics, artificial intelligence, and ethics. In game theory, it mirrors dilemmas where cooperation yields greater rewards than selfishness, though short-term incentives tempt defection. In AI research, the paradox highlights challenges in designing systems capable of predicting and responding to human behavior. Ethically, it raises questions about trust, autonomy, and the value of alignment with external forces. In literature and film, the paradox inspires explorations of fate versus free will. Characters grappling with predetermined paths versus personal agency often echo the tension between one-boxing and two-boxing. From Greek tragedies to dystopian novels, these stories probe the boundaries of human control, questioning whether our choices truly matter or if destiny always prevails. Psychologically, the paradox reveals cognitive biases like loss aversion and overconfidence. Many people struggle to reconcile the abstract logic of a scenario with visceral emotions tied to risk and reward. The discomfort stems from conflicting intuitions. The desire for certainty clashes with the allure of potential windfalls. Understanding these dynamics helps illuminate broader patterns in human decision-making. Philosophically, Newcomb's paradox challenges notions of determinism and moral responsibility. If a superintelligence can predict our choices with precision, does free will exist? Or are we merely executing preordained scripts? Such questions blur the line between autonomy and inevitability, prompting deeper reflection on the nature of agency. Ultimately, Newcomb's paradox is less about finding the right answer and more about examining the frameworks through which we make decisions. It encourages us to weigh evidence against instinct, short-term gains against long-term benefits, and independence against interdependence. Whether viewed as a puzzle or a parable, The paradox reminds us that choices are rarely as simple as they seem, and that wisdom lies in embracing complexity. The Friendship Paradox. Have you ever felt like everyone around you is more popular, more connected, or just plain cooler than you are? It turns out there's a mathematical reason for this feeling, and it has nothing to do with your social skills. This phenomenon is known as the Friendship Paradox, a counterintuitive truth about networks and relationships. On average, your friends have more friends than you do. To understand why this happens, let's break it down. Imagine a small social network of 5 people. Alice has 3 friends, Bob has 2, Carol has 4, Dave has 1, and Eve has 2. If we calculate the average number of friends each person has, it comes out to 2.4. But if we look at the friends of these individuals, their friends, we find that some names appear more frequently than others. For instance, Carol, who has 4 connections, contributes disproportionately to the overall count because she shows up in many friendship lists. As a result, the average number of friends among all friends, weighted by how often they appear, exceeds the simple average of individual friendships. The friendship paradox arises because highly connected individuals skew the distribution. In any network, a few people tend to have an outsized number of connections, while most have fewer. Since you're more likely to befriend someone who is well-connected, your perception of the social landscape becomes distorted. You see a world filled with gregarious, sociable people, even though statistically, most individuals have fewer connections than their friends. This paradox isn't limited to personal relationships. It applies to virtually any type of network, from online platforms to professional collaborations. On social media, for example, you might notice that your followers seem to follow more accounts than you do, or that their posts receive more likes and comments. Similarly, in academic circles, researchers whose work is widely cited often collaborate with others who also publish prolifically, creating the illusion that everyone in the field is exceptionally productive. Beyond its mathematical elegance, the friendship paradox holds practical implications. Public health officials use it to identify key influencers during disease outbreaks. By targeting individuals with large networks, those whose friends are likely to include many others, they can maximize the reach of interventions like vaccinations or awareness campaigns. In marketing, companies leverage the paradox to promote products through highly connected consumers, knowing that their endorsements will ripple outward effectively. On a psychological level, the paradox explains why so many people feel inadequate when comparing themselves to others. Social media exacerbates this effect by showcasing curated highlights of people's lives, reinforcing perceptions of inequality. The friendship paradox reminds us that these comparisons are inherently biased. We naturally gravitate toward those who stand out, whether due to popularity, success, or charisma. In literature and art, the paradox serves as a metaphor for the human tendency to idealize others. Characters who idolize mentors, heroes, or peers often discover that these figures are not as extraordinary as they seemed. Such narratives explore themes of self-doubt, aspiration, and a quest for authenticity, encouraging readers to embrace their unique qualities rather than measure themselves against unrealistic standards. Philosophically, the friendship paradox invites reflection on the nature of connection and community. Does the quality of relationships matter more than quantity? Are we defined by our direct interactions or by the broader web of associations we inhabit? These questions challenge us to reconsider what it means to belong and whether true fulfillment lies in being well-connected or deeply understood. Ultimately, the friendship paradox teaches humility and perspective. It reminds us that our experiences are shaped by statistical quirks as much as personal choices. Rather than envying those who seem to have it all, we can focus on nurturing meaningful bonds and appreciating the richness of our own networks. Whether navigating friendships, careers, or digital spaces, the paradox encourages us to look beyond appearances and recognize that everyone feels a little overshadowed sometimes. The Raven Paradox. Imagine you're a detective trying to solve a mystery. Your task is to confirm the hypothesis: all ravens are black. To gather evidence, you observe countless ravens, each one uniformly black. Case closed, right? Not quite. According to the Raven Paradox, proposed by philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel, your conclusion is far more complicated than it seems, and may hinge on observations that don't involve ravens at all. Here's the twist. Logically speaking, the statement all ravens are black is equivalent to its contrapositive. If something is not black, then it is not a raven. This equivalence implies that observing non-black objects, like green apples or white shoes, can technically support the original hypothesis. After all, if every non-black thing you encounter fails to be a raven, you've indirectly reinforced the claim that all ravens are indeed black. But does spotting a banana really tell you anything meaningful about ravens? The Raven Paradox exposes a tension between formal logic and intuitive reasoning. From a purely deductive standpoint, confirming the contrapositive strengthens the original proposition. Yet, intuitively, examining unrelated items feels irrelevant to the investigation. How can something as mundane as a pencil contribute to understanding bird plumage? To resolve this conundrum, philosophers propose several interpretations. One approach distinguishes between relevance and validity. While observing non-black objects satisfies the rules of logic, it lacks practical significance. A red car may technically support the hypothesis, but it provides no new information about ravens themselves. Thus, relevance becomes a filter for distinguishing useful evidence from trivialities. Another solution emphasizes the role of background knowledge. In real-world scenarios, we rely on prior assumptions to guide our reasoning. For instance, knowing that ravens are birds and that color variation exists within species helps us focus on pertinent data. Without this context, the paradox collapses into absurdity, highlighting the importance of integrating empirical insights with abstract principles. The Raven Paradox also intersects with debates about induction, the process of drawing general conclusions from specific instances. Philosophers like David Hume questioned whether inductive reasoning could ever yield certainty, given the possibility of exceptions. The paradox amplifies this skepticism by showing how seemingly valid methods can produce bizarre results when applied indiscriminately. In scientific practice, the paradox underscores the need for strategic observation. Researchers design experiments to maximize informativeness, focusing on variables directly related to their hypotheses. For example, studying animal behavior requires careful selection of subjects and conditions to ensure meaningful outcomes. Relying on tangential data risks diluting the value of findings, leading to wasted effort or misleading conclusions. Culturally, the Raven Paradox resonates with themes of misdirection and hidden truths. Mystery novels and films often feature detectives piecing together clues that initially seem unrelated, only to reveal deeper connections later. These stories mirror the paradoxical journey of discovery, where apparent irrelevancies transform into critical insights, or distractions masquerading as progress. Psychologically, the paradox reflects cognitive biases like confirmation bias and pattern recognition. Humans excel at identifying correlations, but we sometimes overextend these abilities, attributing meaning to coincidences or peripheral details. The Raven Paradox cautions against such tendencies, urging us to prioritize rigor over intuition when evaluating evidence. Philosophically, the paradox challenges notions of truth and justification. Can a hypothesis be considered proven if supported by irrelevant data? Or does the quality of evidence matter as much as its quantity? Such questions complicate traditional views of knowledge, suggesting that understanding requires both breadth and depth. Ultimately, the Raven Paradox is a reminder of the complexities inherent in reasoning. It invites us to balance logic with pragmatism, ensuring that our investigations remain grounded in reality. Whether solving mysteries, conducting research, or making everyday decisions, the paradox encourages us to scrutinize our assumptions and distinguish between what counts as proof and what merely distracts us from it. Hilbert's Hotel Paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all occupied. A new guest arrives and asks for a room. Instead of turning them away, the manager cheerfully announces, "No problem. He simply asks each current guest to move to the next room. Guest in room 1 moves to room 2, guest in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. In this way, room 1 becomes available for the newcomer. Welcome to Hilbert's Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment devised by mathematician David Hilbert to explore the mind-bending properties of infinity. The paradox doesn't stop there. Suppose an infinite busload of tourists arrives, each needing a room. Again, the manager remains unfazed. He instructs every existing guest to move to the room whose number is double their current one. Room 1 goes to room 2, room 2 to room 4, room 3 to room 6, and so forth. This frees up all the odd-numbered rooms, creating space for the infinite group. Through these maneuvers, Hilbert demonstrates that infinity behaves in ways that defy our everyday intuitions about size and capacity. At its core, the paradox challenges how we think about numbers and sets. In finite systems, adding or subtracting elements changes the total count. But in infinite systems, counterintuitive rules apply. For example, the set of all natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, has the same cardinality size as the set of all even numbers, 2, 4, 6, despite the latter being a subset of the former. This property, known as countable infinity, underpins much of modern mathematics, but feels deeply strange when applied to physical scenarios like hotels. Hilbert's hotel also raises questions about practical applications of infinity. While infinity is a useful concept in theoretical fields like calculus and set theory, it rarely manifests directly in the real world. Can we truly imagine a hotel with infinite rooms? Or is the paradox merely a playful abstraction designed to stretch our minds? These musings blur the line between mathematical rigor and philosophical speculation, inviting us to ponder whether infinity exists beyond human constructs. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of endlessness and possibility. Stories featuring infinite libraries, labyrinths, or timelines echo the boundless potential suggested by Hilbert's hotel. Works like Jorge Luis Borges' The Library of Babel or movies like Interstellar capture the awe-inspiring, and sometimes unsettling, nature of infinity, reminding us of humanity's insignificance within vast, incomprehensible systems. Psychologically, the paradox highlights cognitive limitations when grappling with abstract concepts. Humans evolved to process finite quantities, making infinity inherently difficult to visualize or comprehend. The discomfort arises not from ignorance, but from confronting something fundamentally alien to our experience. By engaging with such paradoxes, we train ourselves to embrace uncertainty and expand our intellectual horizons. Philosophically, Hilbert's hotel touches on debates about the nature of reality. Is infinity a feature of the universe? Or is it purely a tool for modeling phenomena? Some physicists posit that space and time might be infinite, while others argue for bounded dimensions. Similarly, theologians have long debated whether divine omnipotence implies infinite attributes, using paradoxical arguments to probe the limits of language and logic. Ultimately, Hilbert's hotel paradox is less about resolving contradictions and more about marveling at the mysteries of infinity. It reminds us that mathematics is not just a collection of formulas, but a creative endeavor capable of revealing profound truths. Whether contemplating the cosmos, crafting narratives, or solving equations, the paradox invites us to dream big and recognize that some wonders lie forever beyond full comprehension. The Pinocchio Paradox. What happens if Pinocchio, the wooden boy whose nose grows whenever he lies, declares, "My nose will grow now"? If a statement is true, then his nose should grow, but that would mean he told the truth, which contradicts the premise that his nose only grows when he lies. Conversely, if a statement is false, his nose should grow, thereby making the statement true. Either way, Pinocchio finds himself trapped in a logical loop, unable to escape the tangled web of his own words. This is the essence of the Pinocchio Paradox, a playful yet profound exploration of self-reference and contradiction. Like other classic paradoxes, it exposes flaws in binary frameworks, challenging assumptions about truth, falsehood, and causality. At first glance, the scenario seems absurd, a mere children's tale taken to illogical extremes. Yet, beneath its whimsical surface lies a serious inquiry into the foundations of logic and language. To unpack the paradox, let's examine the mechanics of Pinocchio's curse. His nose grows as a direct consequence of lying, defined here as uttering statements that are knowingly false. When Pinocchio says, "My nose will grow now," he creates a feedback loop. The truth value of his statement depends on the outcome, which in turn hinges on the truth value. This circular dependency renders the situation irresolvable within standard logical systems. One possible resolution involves rejecting the premise that Pinocchio's statement must be either wholly true or wholly false. Fuzzy logic, which allows for degrees of truth, offers a partial solution. Perhaps Pinocchio's declaration is simultaneously partially true and partially false, reflecting the ambiguity inherent in self-referential claims. However, this approach sidesteps rather than solves the paradox, leaving open questions about how to interpret intermediate states. Another perspective frames the paradox as a critique of rigid definitions. The rule governing Pinocchio's nose assumes clear distinctions between truth and falsehood, yet many statements resist such classification. Consider sentences like, "This sentence is false," or "I am lying right now." These examples demonstrate that language can generate contradictions through self-reference, highlighting the fragility of linguistic structures. The Pinocchio paradox also resonates with broader existential themes. It mirrors the human struggle to reconcile intentions with consequences, actions with outcomes. Just as Pinocchio's words shape his reality, our choices often produce unintended effects, forcing us to navigate complex moral landscapes. The paradox serves as a metaphor for accountability, reminding us that honesty and integrity require careful consideration of both speech and impact. In popular culture, the paradox appears in various forms, from science fiction to satire. Characters who face ironic punishments for their hubris or deceit frequently embody the tension between control and chaos. Movies like Liar Liar or TV episodes where protagonists confront magical curses echo the paradox's central theme: the power of words to shape, and sometimes betray, our lives. Philosophically, the paradox challenges notions of agency and determinism. Does Pinocchio retain free will over his statements, or is he enslaved by the rules governing his body? If the latter, does this imply that freedom is an illusion constrained by pre-existing frameworks? Such questions invite deeper reflection on the nature of choice and responsibility, transcending the whimsical premise of a talking puppet. Practically speaking, the Pinocchio paradox offers insights into communication and ethics. Words carry weight. They influence perceptions, relationships, and realities. Recognizing the potential for self-contradiction encourages us to speak thoughtfully, balancing clarity with sincerity. Whether addressing personal dilemmas or societal issues, the paradox reminds us that language is both a tool and a trap, requiring vigilance and wisdom to wield effectively. Ultimately, the Pinocchio paradox is a testament to the enduring allure of paradoxes themselves. It invites us to laugh at its absurdity while pondering its implications, bridging the gap between humor and profundity. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale or a cerebral exercise, the paradox challenges us to think critically and perhaps tread lightly when navigating the slippery terrain of truth and falsehood. The St. Petersburg Paradox. Imagine a casino game with a simple premise. You flip a fair coin repeatedly until it lands on tails. If tails appears on the first flip, you win $2. If it appears on the second flip, you win $4. On the third, $8, and so on, doubling your winnings with each additional head. The question is, how much would you be willing to pay to play this game? At first glance, the potential payouts seem enticing. After all, there's no upper limit to how much you could win. Yet, most people wouldn't bet more than a modest amount. even though the expected value of the game suggests they should wager far more. This discrepancy between theoretical calculation and real-world behavior is the heart of the St. Petersburg Paradox. To understand the paradox, let's delve into the math. The expected value, EV, of the game is calculated by summing the probabilities of each outcome multiplied by their respective payouts. For the first flip, tails, the probability is 1/2, and the payout is $2, contributing $1 to the EV. For the second flip, the probability drops to 1/4, but the payout doubles to $4, again adding $1 to the EV. This pattern continues indefinitely. Each subsequent term contributes another dollar, making the total EV infinite. Mathematically, the game promises an unbounded return, suggesting that any finite entry fee, even millions of dollars, would be justified. Yet, in practice, few people are willing to pay exorbitant sums to play. Why does intuition clash so dramatically with the mathematics? One explanation lies in the concept of diminishing marginal utility, the idea that each additional dollar provides less satisfaction than the one before. While winning $2 might feel significant, doubling to $4 or $8 adds progressively less value, especially for someone with substantial wealth. Conversely, losing a large entry fee could impose severe financial strain, outweighing the abstract allure of astronomical gains. Another factor is risk aversion. Humans tend to prioritize avoiding losses over pursuing uncertain rewards, a tendency rooted in evolutionary psychology. Even if the odds favor eventual success, the possibility of repeated failures and the accompanying emotional toll deters many from taking the gamble. This behavioral bias helps explain why people prefer smaller, predictable payouts over high-risk, high-reward scenarios. The St. Petersburg Paradox also intersects with debates about rationality and decision-making. Traditional economic models assume individuals act as rational agents, maximizing expected utility based on objective probabilities. However, the paradox reveals limitations in this framework, highlighting the need for alternative approaches that incorporate psychological factors like loss aversion and subjective evaluation. Behavioral economics has emerged partly in response to such anomalies, offering richer insights into human behavior. In literature and art, the paradox serves as a metaphor for ambition and hubris. Characters who chase limitless dreams often find themselves ensnared by greed or impracticality, mirroring the tension between infinite potential and finite resources. Stories of gamblers, explorers, or inventors frequently explore these themes, balancing optimism with caution and reminding us that not all risks are worth taking. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about infinity and human desire. Can we truly grasp the implications of boundless possibilities, or do our minds naturally impose limits to make sense of the world? Does the pursuit of infinite wealth, or knowledge, or power lead to fulfillment, or does it expose the emptiness of insatiable longing? Such musings challenge us to reflect on what we value most and whether those values align with our actions. From a practical standpoint, the St. Petersburg Paradox informs discussions about investment strategies, insurance policies, and public policy. Financial analysts use similar reasoning to assess risks and rewards, ensuring that decisions account for both statistical likelihoods and human preferences. Governments apply analogous principles when designing social programs, weighing costs against benefits to optimize societal well-being. Ultimately, the St. Petersburg Paradox teaches humility and perspective. It reminds us that numbers alone cannot dictate choices, that context, emotion, and individual circumstances play vital roles in shaping decisions. Whether navigating games of chance, career paths, or life goals, the paradox encourages us to balance aspiration with prudence, recognizing that sometimes the wisest move is knowing when to walk away. The Penrose Triangle, impossible object. Picture an object that defies geometry. A three-dimensional triangle where each corner connects seamlessly to the next, yet the structure loops back on itself in ways that violate physical laws. This is the Penrose triangle, an optical illusion and impossible object that challenges our perception of space, form, and reality. First introduced by mathematician Roger Penrose and his father Lionel Penrose in the 1950s, the triangle captivates viewers with its elegant impossibility, forcing us to confront the boundaries of visual cognition. At first glance, the Penrose triangle appears plausible, a deceptively simple arrangement of beams forming a closed loop. Upon closer inspection, however, contradictions emerge. Each beam seems to extend logically from one vertex to the next, but the overall configuration cannot exist in three-dimensional space. The illusion relies on perspective tricks, exploiting our brain's tendency to interpret two-dimensional drawings as three-dimensional objects. By carefully arranging angles and shading, artists create the impression of coherence while concealing underlying inconsistencies. The paradoxical nature of the Penrose triangle extends beyond aesthetics, touching on deeper philosophical questions about representation and truth. How do we distinguish between appearance and reality? What assumptions underlie our interpretations of the world? These issues resonate with epistemology, the study of knowledge, highlighting the gap between sensory input and conceptual understanding. The triangle reminds us that perception is not passive observation, but active construction, shaped by expectations, biases, and cognitive shortcuts. In art and design, the Penrose triangle inspires explorations of surrealism and abstraction. Artists like M.C. Escher famously incorporated impossible objects into their work, blending mathematical precision with imaginative flair. Escher's lithograph Waterfall, featuring a perpetual motion machine built around a Penrose-like structure, exemplifies the interplay between logic and creativity. Such pieces invite viewers to suspend disbelief, challenging conventional notions of order and chaos. Psychologically, the triangle sheds light on visual processing and problem-solving. When confronted with conflicting cues, our brains attempt to resolve discrepancies by prioritizing certain features over others. In the case of the Penrose triangle, we focus on local consistency, the alignment of individual segments at the expense of global coherence. This selective attention reflects broader patterns in cognition, where fragmented information is synthesized into cohesive narratives despite inherent ambiguities. Philosophically, the Penrose triangle raises questions about the nature of existence and perception. If an object can appear real yet defy physical laws, what does that say about the reliability of our senses? Are we trapped in a simulated reality, interpreting shadows on Plato's cave wall? Or does the triangle simply reveal the flexibility of human imagination, capable of conjuring worlds that transcend material constraints? Such inquiries blur the line between objective fact and subjective experience, prompting deeper reflection on the foundations of knowledge. Practically speaking, the Penrose triangle influences fields ranging from architecture to virtual reality. Architects use similar techniques to create optical illusions, manipulating scale and proportion to enhance spatial experiences. In digital environments, designers leverage impossible geometries to craft immersive, otherworldly landscapes that push the limits of believability. These applications demonstrate the enduring appeal of paradoxes, not merely as intellectual curiosities, but as tools for innovation and expression. Ultimately, the Penrose triangle is a celebration of ambiguity and wonder. It reminds us that reality is richer and stranger than our perceptions allow, inviting us to embrace complexity and contradiction. Whether gazing at an artwork, solving a puzzle, or contemplating the mysteries of the universe, the triangle encourages us to look beyond surface appearances and marvel at the infinite possibilities hidden within the ordinary. The Abilene Paradox. Picture this. A family sits around the dinner table on a hot summer evening, bored and restless. Someone jokingly suggests taking a road trip to Abilene, a dusty town hours away. No one particularly wants to go, but each person assumes everyone else is excited about the idea. One by one, they reluctantly agree, suppressing their true feelings to avoid conflict or disappointment. Hours later, after enduring a long, uncomfortable drive, they return home exhausted and finally admit that none of them actually wanted to go in the first place. This scenario, known as the Abilene Paradox, reveals how groups can make decisions that no individual member truly desires. At its core, the paradox highlights a breakdown in communication and collective decision-making. It occurs when individuals prioritize perceived group harmony over honest expression, leading to outcomes that contradict personal preferences. Unlike conflicts arising from disagreement, the Abilene Paradox stems from a failure to voice dissent or even recognize it exists. Each person mistakenly believes they are alone in their reluctance, creating a silent consensus that drives the group toward an undesirable conclusion. To understand why this happens, consider the psychological dynamics at play. Humans are social creatures wired for cooperation and belonging. We often suppress our own opinions to avoid rocking the boat, fearing rejection or judgment if we stand apart from the group. Additionally, cognitive biases like pluralistic ignorance exacerbate the problem. When people misinterpret others' behavior as enthusiasm rather than resignation, they conform to what they perceive as the majority view, even though the majority may feel the same way they do. The Abilene Paradox has profound implications for organizations, families, and communities. In corporate settings, teams may approve projects or strategies nobody genuinely supports, wasting resources and stifling innovation. For example, a company might launch a product line that aligns with neither market demand nor employee passion simply because no one spoke up during planning meetings. Similarly, in personal relationships, partners might commit to vacations, events, or lifestyles they secretly dread, eroding trust and satisfaction over time. In literature and film, the paradox serves as a powerful device for exploring themes of conformity and authenticity. Characters who suppress their true desires to fit in or please others often face crises of identity, discovering too late the cost of silence. Works like Arthur Miller's The Crucible or movies like The Wave illustrate the dangers of groupthink, reminding us that unspoken truths can fester beneath the surface until they explode into chaos. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about autonomy and responsibility. Is it better to conform for the sake of unity, or should individuals risk disruption by speaking their minds? Does collective decision-making inherently sacrifice individual agency, or can systems be designed to honor both? These tensions challenge us to balance the needs of the many with the rights of the few, navigating the delicate interplay between cooperation and self-expression. From a practical standpoint, the Abilene Paradox offers valuable lessons for leadership and teamwork. Encouraging open dialogue, fostering psychological safety, and promoting diverse perspectives can help prevent such misalignments. Techniques like anonymous voting or designated devil's advocates ensure that dissenting voices are heard without fear of reprisal. By prioritizing transparency and accountability, groups can avoid falling into the trap of false consensus. Ultimately, the Abilene Paradox is a reminder of the power and peril of group dynamics. It teaches us that silence is not always golden. Sometimes, it conceals hidden discontent that undermines shared goals. Whether managing teams, nurturing relationships, or participating in community initiatives, the paradox urges us to speak up, listen deeply, and seek alignment that reflects genuine desires rather than assumed agreement. The Mere Addition Paradox. Imagine a world where everyone lives happy, fulfilling lives. A utopia free from suffering or deprivation. Now, suppose you add more people to this world, ensuring their lives are also worth living, though slightly less satisfying than those already present. Intuitively, this seems like a net positive change. More happiness exists overall. But here's the twist. If you continue adding increasingly larger populations with progressively lower levels of well-being, eventually the average quality of life drops below what most would consider acceptable. This unsettling scenario is the essence of the Mere Addition Paradox, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Parfit to explore the ethics of population growth and utilitarianism. The paradox arises from conflicting intuitions about what constitutes a better world. On one hand, utilitarian principles suggest that maximizing total happiness is morally desirable, regardless of distribution. Adding people whose lives are worth living increases overall utility, making the world quantifiably better. On the other hand, many argue that diminishing standards of living degrade the value of existence, rendering large populations ethically questionable. How can a world with billions of barely tolerable lives compare favorably to a smaller, happier society? To resolve this tension, philosophers propose various ethical frameworks. One approach emphasizes average rather than total happiness, arguing that a higher mean well-being outweighs sheer numbers. Under this view, the mere addition paradox dissolves because adding less satisfied individuals reduces the overall average, creating a worse outcome. However, critics counter that privileging averages ignores the intrinsic value of additional lives, potentially justifying neglecting marginalized groups whose inclusion lowers the mean. Another solution involves threshold deontology, which sets minimum standards for acceptable living conditions. According to this perspective, adding people is permissible only if their quality of life exceeds a certain baseline. While this addresses concerns about deteriorating standards, it raises new questions. Who determines the threshold? And how do we weigh trade-offs between quantity and quality? The mere addition paradox also intersects with debates about sustainability and resource allocation. As global populations grow, societies face mounting pressures to provide food, water, healthcare, and shelter. Policymakers must grapple with whether expanding human numbers enhances or diminishes collective welfare, balancing economic growth against environmental degradation. The paradox underscores the complexity of these decisions, highlighting the need for nuanced approaches that integrate ecological, social, and ethical considerations. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of dystopia and moral ambiguity. Stories set in overcrowded futures, like Brave New World or Children of Men, reflect anxieties about unchecked expansion and declining standards of living. These narratives probe the consequences of prioritizing quantity over quality, challenging readers to envision alternative paths forward. Psychologically, the paradox reveals cognitive dissonance when weighing competing values. Humans struggle to reconcile abstract ideals with concrete realities, oscillating between compassion for individuals and concern for broader trends. This internal conflict complicates efforts to address issues like poverty, migration, and climate change, requiring careful navigation of competing priorities. Philosophically, the paradox challenges notions of progress and morality. Let's talk about the wrong opinion paradox, a fun little brain twister that shows how tricky opinions can be. Imagine two kids arguing on the playground. One kid says, "Some opinions can be wrong." The other kid shakes their head and says, "No way. Opinions are just individuals' thoughts and feelings rather than objective facts, so they can't be wrong." Now here's where it gets silly. If opinions can't be wrong, like the second kid says, then the first kid's opinion, "Some opinions can be wrong," is totally fine and can't be wrong either. But wait, if that's true, then the second kid is right, which means opinions can't be wrong, but that makes the first kid wrong again. See the loop? It's like a merry-go-round of ideas. If opinions are always right, then saying opinions can be wrong must also be right. But if opinions can be wrong, then the idea that opinions can't be wrong falls apart too. This playful paradox shows how messy things get when we try to figure out if our thoughts are just feelings or if they need to follow rules. Are all opinions special snowflakes that can't be judged, or do some need to pass a test? It's a quirky puzzle that reminds us how funny and twisty thinking can be. The intrinsic value paradox. Consider a pristine, untouched wilderness teeming with life and breathtaking landscapes. Does this wilderness hold value simply because it exists, independent of any human use or appreciation? Or does its value depend on someone, somewhere, recognizing and benefiting from it, perhaps through tourism, scientific study, or even just the knowledge that such a place exists. This is the heart of the intrinsic value paradox. Can something possess inherent worth, regardless of external factors, or is all value ultimately dependent on an observer or beneficiary? The paradox forces us to confront fundamental questions about what we consider valuable and why. On one side, proponents of intrinsic value argue that certain things, like natural beauty, biodiversity, or even human life, possess an inherent dignity or worth that transcends any practical use. A majestic mountain range, they might say, is valuable in itself, even if no human ever sets eyes upon it. This perspective often underpins environmental ethics, driving conservation efforts based on the idea that nature has a right to exist, regardless of its utility to humans. On the other side, critics of intrinsic value argue that all value is ultimately extrinsic, that is, it arises from the relationship between something and a valuer. A diamond, for example, is only valuable because humans find it beautiful and desirable. If no conscious beings existed to appreciate it, a diamond would be just another rock. This view suggests that the wilderness only has value insofar as it provides something to someone: clean air, water, recreational opportunities, or even spiritual solace. The debate extends beyond environmental concerns. Consider a work of art hidden away in a vault, never seen by anyone. Does it still have artistic value? A proponent of intrinsic value might argue that its beauty and craftsmanship give it inherent worth, regardless of whether it's ever displayed. An opponent might counter that its value lies in its potential to inspire, provoke thought, or provide aesthetic pleasure, and that without an audience, this potential remains unrealized. The paradox also touches on ethical considerations. If human life has intrinsic value, then certain actions, like murder, are inherently wrong, regardless of the circumstances. But if all value is extrinsic, then morality becomes more relative, potentially dependent on cultural norms or individual preferences. This has profound implications for how we structure societies and make ethical judgments. In literature and art, the paradox is explored through narratives that examine the relationship between humans and the natural world, or between creators and their creations. Stories about isolated artists, undiscovered masterpieces, or pristine environments untouched by civilization often grapple with the question of whether value exists independently of observation and appreciation. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the human tendency to project our own values onto the world around us. We often struggle to separate our subjective experience of something from its objective existence. The very act of labeling something valuable implies a judgment, a perspective, and this raises the question of whether true objectivity is even possible. Philosophically, the intrinsic value paradox connects to broader debates about objectivity and subjectivity, realism and anti-realism. Realists argue that there are objective truths and values that exist independently of human minds. Anti-realists counter that all truth and value are constructed by human consciousness. The paradox of intrinsic value sits squarely at the intersection of these competing viewpoints. From a practical perspective, the paradox has implications for how we make decisions about resource allocation, conservation, and even artistic patronage. If we believe that certain things have intrinsic value, we might be more willing to protect them, even at a cost to ourselves. If we believe that all value is extrinsic, we might prioritize things that provide the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. Ultimately, the intrinsic value paradox forces us to confront our own values and biases. It challenges us to consider whether anything truly exists in isolation, independent of any relationship or observer. It reminds us that the very act of valuing is a human endeavor, and that our perceptions shape the world we inhabit. Whether discussing a magnificent artwork or a delicate ecosystem, the paradox provides crucial insights into how we assign value. The paradox of deterrence. A nation possesses a vast arsenal of nuclear weapons, capable of obliterating entire cities and causing unimaginable devastation. Yet, the primary purpose of these weapons is not to be used. Their power lies in their very existence, in the threat they pose, deterring potential adversaries from attacking in the first place. This is the chilling essence of the paradox of deterrence. The most effective weapons are those that are never deployed. Their strength lies in preventing their own use. The paradox hinges on the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, a Cold War doctrine that posits that any nuclear attack would inevitably lead to a retaliatory strike, resulting in the annihilation of both attacker and defender. In this scenario, the cost of aggression is simply too high, making any rational actor unwilling to initiate a conflict. The weapons, therefore, serve as a deterrent, maintaining a precarious peace through the constant threat of catastrophic consequences. The paradox is deeply unsettling. It suggests that our safety depends on the potential for unimaginable destruction. We build weapons of mass destruction, not to wage war, but to prevent it, a seemingly contradictory and morally ambiguous strategy. The very existence of these weapons creates a constant, underlying tension, a sense of living on the brink of annihilation. The paradox raises crucial ethical questions. Is it morally justifiable to possess weapons capable of causing such widespread suffering, even if the intention is to prevent their use? Does the threat of retaliation truly guarantee peace, or does it merely escalate the stakes, increasing the risk of accidental or intentional conflict? These questions have fueled intense debates among policymakers, ethicists, and the public for decades. In literature and art, the paradox of deterrence is often explored through dystopian narratives that depict the consequences of nuclear war or the psychological toll of living under the constant threat of annihilation. Films like Dr. Strangelove satirize the absurdity of MAD, while novels like On the Beach explore the despair and hopelessness of a post-apocalyptic world. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the human capacity for both rational calculation and irrational fear. Deterrence relies on the assumption that adversaries will act rationally, weighing the costs and benefits of their actions. However, human behavior is not always predictable, and factors like miscalculation, miscommunication, or even sheer madness can undermine the logic of deterrence. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about the nature of power, the ethics of war, and the role of fear in maintaining social order. It challenges us to consider whether true security can ever be achieved through the threat of violence, or whether genuine peace requires a different approach, one based on cooperation, diplomacy, and mutual understanding. From a practical perspective, the paradox of deterrence has shaped international relations and military strategy for over half a century. It has led to arms races, nuclear proliferation, and complex negotiations aimed at reducing the risk of nuclear war. It has also spurred efforts to develop alternative security strategies, such as missile defense systems and conventional deterrence. Ultimately, the paradox of deterrence forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that our safety may depend on a delicate balance of terror. It challenges us to find ways to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict, while acknowledging the profound ethical dilemmas posed by the very existence of these weapons. It is a paradox of power, a conundrum that continues to define international security, raising fundamental questions about the very nature of warfare in the age of mass destruction. The observer's paradox. Imagine you're trying to study the behavior of a shy, nocturnal animal. You set up cameras and microphones to record its activities, hoping to gain insights into its natural habits. But the very presence of your equipment, the lights, the sounds, the unfamiliar objects, alters the animal's behavior. It becomes more cautious, less active, and its natural routines are disrupted. This is a simple illustration of the observer's paradox. The act of observing a phenomenon can inherently change that phenomenon. This paradox is particularly prominent in quantum mechanics, where the act of measuring the properties of a subatomic particle, like its position or momentum, fundamentally alters its state. Before observation, a particle exists in a superposition, a probabilistic cloud of potential states. But the moment we measure it, the wave function collapses and the particle chooses a specific state. It's as if the act of looking forces the particle to make a decision. The implications are profound. It suggests that there is no truly objective reality, independent of the observer. The very act of measurement, of interacting with the world, inextricably links the observer and the observed, blurring the lines between subject and object. This has led to intense philosophical debates about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the role of the observer in shaping the universe. The observer's paradox extends beyond physics. In social sciences, it's known as the Hawthorne effect. Studies have shown that people often change their behavior when they know they are being observed, even if the observation is unobtrusive. This can skew research results, making it difficult to determine whether observed changes are due to the intervention being studied or simply to the fact of being observed. In linguistics, the observer's paradox arises when researchers try to study natural language use. People often speak differently when they know they are being recorded or analyzed, becoming more formal, self-conscious, or even trying to perform for the researcher. This makes it challenging to capture truly authentic linguistic data. In literature and art, the paradox is explored through narratives that question the reliability of perception and the nature of reality. Stories with unreliable narrators, or those that delve into the subjective experience of consciousness, often grapple with the idea that our observations are always filtered through our own biases and perspectives. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the interconnectedness of the observer and the observed. It reminds us that we are not passive recipients of information, but active participants in shaping the reality we perceive. Our expectations, beliefs, and even our presence can influence the behavior of others and the outcomes of events. Philosophically, the observer's paradox challenges traditional notions of objectivity and determinism. It suggests that there may be fundamental limits to our ability to know the world independently of our interaction with it. It also raises questions about the nature of consciousness and its role in shaping reality. From a practical perspective, the paradox has implications for research methodology in a wide range of fields. Researchers must carefully consider how their presence and methods might be influencing the phenomena they are studying and develop strategies to minimize these effects. This might involve using unobtrusive observation techniques, conducting longitudinal studies, or employing statistical methods to control for observer effects. Ultimately, the observer's paradox reminds us that we are always part of the system we are studying. There is no neutral, detached viewpoint from which to observe the world. Our very presence, our questions, and our methods inevitably shape the reality we perceive. It is a paradox of knowledge, a fundamental limitation on our ability to separate ourselves from the intricate web of phenomena we call reality. The paradox of originality. In a world saturated with art, music, literature, and ideas accumulated over millennia, can anything truly be original? Every new creation, it seems, builds upon the foundations laid by those who came before. Every artist is influenced by their predecessors, consciously or unconsciously, drawing inspiration from existing styles, techniques, and themes. This is the essence of the paradox of originality. In a world overflowing with existing knowledge and creations, can genuine novelty exist, or is everything merely a remix, a reinterpretation, a variation on a pre-existing theme? The paradox challenges our romantic notions of the solitary genius, the artist who conjures something entirely new out of thin air. It suggests that creativity is not a purely individual act, but a collaborative process, a dialogue with the past. Every new work is, in a sense, a conversation with the works that have come before it, a response, a critique, a reimagining. Consider music. Every musical genre builds upon previous genres, borrowing and transforming elements to create something new. Rock and roll evolved from blues and country. Hip-hop drew inspiration from funk and soul, and electronic music synthesized sound from a variety of sources. Even seemingly radical innovations often have roots in earlier traditions. The same is true in literature. Every novel, every poem, every play is in dialogue with the literary canon. Authors borrow tropes, archetypes, and narrative structures from their predecessors, consciously or unconsciously. Shakespeare drew inspiration from classical mythology and history. Modern novelists echo the themes and techniques of earlier writers, and even the most experimental works often engage with established literary traditions. In art, the concept of appropriation highlights the paradox of originality. Artists deliberately borrow images, objects, or styles from other sources, recontextualizing them to create new meanings. This practice challenges traditional notions of authorship and originality, suggesting that creativity often involves reinterpretation and reimagining, rather than pure invention. The paradox also extends to scientific discovery. Even groundbreaking scientific breakthroughs build upon the work of previous scientists. Newton's laws of motion were based on the observations of Galileo and Kepler. Einstein's theory of relativity was influenced by the work of Maxwell and Lorentz, and every new scientific theory is tested against existing data and knowledge. In literature and art, the paradox itself becomes a subject of exploration. Stories about artists struggling to create something truly original or narratives that explicitly reference and reinterpret earlier works often grapple with the question of whether genuine novelty is possible. Psychologically, the paradox of originality highlights the human need for both novelty and connection. We crave new experiences and ideas, but we also find comfort and meaning in the familiar. Creativity often involves finding a balance between these two impulses, drawing inspiration from the past while striving to create something new. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about the nature of creativity, the role of tradition, and the relationship between the individual and the collective. It challenges us to consider whether originality is a meaningful concept or whether it is an illusion, a product of our limited perspective. From a practical perspective, the paradox has implications for how we evaluate art, literature, and scientific discoveries. We should recognize that even the most groundbreaking works are often indebted to the past, and that creativity often involves reinterpretation and synthesis rather than pure invention. Ultimately, the paradox of originality reminds us that we are all part of a vast, interconnected web of creativity and knowledge. Every new creation is a link in a chain that stretches back through time. While true, absolute originality may be an elusive ideal, the human capacity for innovation, reinterpretation, and synthesis ensures that the creative process continues to evolve and surprise us. It is a paradox of invention, suggesting that originality and borrowing are in fact intertwined. The planning paradox. You have a big project to complete. You could dive right in, tackling tasks as they arise. But you decide to spend time planning first, creating timelines, outlining tasks, and anticipating potential obstacles. You spend hours, even days, meticulously crafting your plan. But as you plan, the deadline looms closer and the time available for actual execution dwindles. This is the planning paradox. The more time you dedicate to planning, the less time you have to execute the plan. Yet without planning, execution can be chaotic, inefficient, and ultimately fail. The paradox highlights the inherent tension between preparation and action. Planning is essential for complex tasks, providing a roadmap, coordinating resources, and mitigating risks. A well-structured plan can save time and effort in the long run, preventing costly mistakes and ensuring that all necessary steps are taken. However, planning can also become a form of procrastination, a way to avoid the actual work involved. Analysis paralysis sets in, where we become so bogged down in the details of the plan that we never actually start the project. We become more focused on perfecting the plan than on achieving the desired outcome. The paradox also reveals the limitations of prediction. No plan, no matter how detailed, can account for every possible contingency. Unexpected events, unforeseen obstacles, and changing circumstances can render even the most meticulously crafted plans obsolete. Over-reliance on a rigid plan can make us inflexible and unable to adapt to changing realities. In business, the planning paradox is a constant challenge. Companies must balance the need for strategic planning with the need for agility and responsiveness. Overly bureaucratic planning processes can stifle innovation and slow down decision-making, while a complete lack of planning can lead to chaos and wasted resources. In software development, the waterfall model, a sequential planning-heavy approach, has often been criticized for its inflexibility, leading to projects that are late, over budget, and fail to meet user needs. Agile methodologies, which emphasize iterative development and continuous feedback, have emerged as a response to the planning paradox, aiming to find a better balance between planning and execution. In literature and art, the paradox is often explored through characters who are overly meticulous planners, or whose carefully laid plans go awry due to unforeseen circumstances. Stories about heists, military campaigns, or complex projects often highlight the tension between planning and execution and the inevitability of the unexpected. Psychologically, the planning paradox reflects the human desire for control and certainty. We plan in an attempt to reduce uncertainty and manage risk, but the very act of planning can create a false sense of security. We may become so attached to our plans that we fail to recognize when they are no longer relevant or effective. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about determinism and free will, predictability, and uncertainty. It challenges us to accept that we cannot fully control the future, and that even the best-laid plans are subject to change. From a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we need to find a balance between planning and action. We should plan enough to provide direction and coordinate resources, but not so much that we become paralyzed by analysis. We should also build flexibility into our plans, allowing for adaptation and improvisation as circumstances change. Ultimately, the planning paradox reminds us that planning is a means to an end, not an end in itself. The goal is not to create a perfect plan, but to achieve a desired outcome. We must be willing to adjust our plans, to learn from our mistakes, and to embrace the inherent uncertainty of the future. It's a paradox of execution, teaching that both preparation and improvisation are essential for achievement. The paradox of self-awareness. You embark on a journey of self-discovery. You read self-help books, attend workshops, practice mindfulness, and delve deep into your own thoughts and feelings. As you learn more about yourself, your strengths, weaknesses, patterns, and motivations, you paradoxically realize how much more there is to know. The vast landscape of your inner world seems to expand, revealing hidden depths and complexities you never knew existed. This is the paradox of self-awareness. The more you understand yourself, the more you realize the immensity of what remains unknown, both about yourself and the universe. The paradox challenges the notion that self-knowledge is a finite, achievable goal. It suggests that the journey of self-discovery is an ongoing process, a spiral that deepens with each turn. The more we learn, the more we realize the limitations of our understanding. This paradox is rooted in the inherent complexity of human consciousness. We are not simple, static beings. We are constantly evolving, changing, and adapting. Our thoughts, feelings, and motivations are influenced by a myriad of factors, both conscious and unconscious. Our memories are imperfect, our perceptions are subjective, and our understanding of ourselves is always filtered through our own biases and experiences. The paradox also reflects the vastness and mystery of the universe. The more we learn about the world around us, through science, philosophy, and art, the more we realize how much we don't know. The universe is infinitely complex, and our human minds are limited in their capacity to comprehend it fully. In psychology, the paradox of self-awareness is a central theme. Therapists often guide clients on a journey of self-discovery, helping them to uncover unconscious patterns and motivations. But the goal is not to achieve complete self-knowledge, but rather to develop a greater understanding of oneself and to learn how to navigate the complexities of one's inner world. In philosophy, the paradox is explored through questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of human knowledge, and the relationship between the self and the universe. Philosophers from Socrates to Sartre have grappled with the challenges of self-understanding, recognizing that the quest for self-knowledge is a lifelong pursuit. In literature and art, the paradox is often depicted through characters who embark on journeys of self-discovery, only to find that the more they learn, the more questions they have. Stories about identity, self-deception, and the search for meaning often explore the complexities and limitations of self-awareness. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the importance of humility and open-mindedness. We must be willing to acknowledge the limits of our understanding, both of ourselves and of the world around us. We must be open to new perspectives, willing to challenge our own assumptions, and to embrace the ongoing process of learning and growth. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the nature of reality. It challenges us to consider whether complete self-knowledge is even possible, and whether the pursuit of such knowledge is ultimately a worthwhile endeavor. From a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we should approach self-discovery with a sense of curiosity and humility. We should be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers, and we should be willing to embrace the ongoing process of learning and growth. We must recognize self-awareness is a journey, not a destination. Ultimately, the paradox of self-awareness reminds us that the human experience is characterized by both knowledge and mystery. The more we learn about ourselves and the universe, the more we realize the vastness of what remains unknown. It is a paradox of understanding, one which highlights the limitless nature of self-exploration. The paradox of novelty. You crave new experiences. You travel to exotic places, try new foods, meet new people, and seek out anything that breaks the monotony of your daily routine. You are driven by a desire for novelty, for the excitement and stimulation of the unfamiliar. Yet, true novelty, by its very nature, is unpredictable, unsettling, and even frightening. It can disrupt our established routines, challenge our beliefs, and force us to confront the unknown. This is the paradox of novelty. We are drawn to the new and exciting, yet genuine novelty is inherently disruptive and can be deeply unsettling. The paradox highlights the tension between our desire for security and our need for growth. We seek comfort and predictability in the familiar, but we also crave the stimulation and excitement of the new. We want to expand our horizons, but we also fear the unknown. This tension is deeply rooted in our biology. Our brains are wired to detect and respond to novelty. New experiences trigger the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This motivates us to explore our environment, to learn new things, and to adapt to changing circumstances. However, our brains are also wired to detect and respond to threats. The unknown can be dangerous, and our brains are designed to err on the side of caution. When we encounter something truly novel, something that doesn't fit into our existing frameworks of understanding, it can trigger fear, anxiety, and even a sense of disorientation. In psychology, the paradox of novelty is reflected in the concept of optimal arousal. We seek a level of stimulation that is neither too boring nor too overwhelming. Too little novelty leads to boredom and stagnation, while too much novelty leads to stress and anxiety. In marketing and advertising, the paradox is exploited to capture our attention. Advertisers use novel images, sounds, and messages to break through the clutter and grab our attention. But they must also be careful not to be too novel, as this can alienate or confuse consumers. In literature and art, the paradox is often explored through stories about journeys, exploration, and encounters with the unknown. Characters who venture into unfamiliar territory often face challenges and dangers, but they also experience growth and transformation. Stories about first contact with alien civilizations or about the discovery of new lands or technologies often grapple with the paradoxical nature of novelty. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about the nature of change, the value of tradition, and the relationship between the known and the unknown. It challenges us to consider how we balance our desire for stability with our need for growth and exploration. From a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we should approach novelty with a sense of both excitement and caution. We should be open to new experiences, but we should also be mindful of our own limits and comfort zones. We should seek out novelty in manageable doses, gradually expanding our horizons rather than plunging headfirst into the completely unknown. Ultimately, the paradox of novelty reminds us that growth and discovery often involve a degree of discomfort. We cannot embrace the new without also confronting the unknown, and this can be both exhilarating and unsettling. It is a paradox of experience, demonstrating that growth requires embracing the unknown, even with apprehension. The paradox of speed. You're running late for an important meeting. You rush out the door, speed down the highway, and weave through traffic, desperately trying to make up for lost time. But your haste leads to mistakes. You miss a turn, get stuck in a traffic jam, or even have a minor accident. Paradoxically, by trying to go faster, you end up arriving even later. This illustrates the paradox of speed. Sometimes, slowing down can actually help you achieve your goals more quickly and effectively. The paradox challenges the common assumption that faster is always better. It suggests that there is an optimal speed for any given task, and that exceeding this speed can lead to diminishing returns, errors, and even counterproductive results. This paradox is evident in many areas of life. In sports, athletes who try to force their performance often end up making mistakes or injuring themselves. In business, companies that rush to launch products without proper testing or planning often encounter costly problems down the line. In learning, trying to cram too much information in too short a time can lead to poor retention and understanding. The paradox is rooted in the limitations of human attention and processing capacity. We can only focus on a limited number of things at once, and our brains need time to process information and make decisions. When we try to go too fast, we overload our cognitive systems, leading to errors, omissions, and poor judgment. In project management, the concept of fast-tracking, overlapping tasks to shorten the project schedule, often leads to increased risk and rework. What seems like a shortcut can actually end up delaying the project due to unforeseen problems and dependencies. In manufacturing, the pursuit of ever-increasing speed can lead to quality control issues. When machines and workers are pushed to their limits, errors are more likely to occur, resulting in defective products and costly rework. In literature and art, the paradox is often explored through stories about characters who are overly hasty or impatient and who suffer the consequences of their impulsiveness. Fables like The Tortoise and the Hare teach the value of steadiness and perseverance over speed. Psychologically, the paradox of speed highlights the importance of mindfulness and deliberate action. By slowing down, we can become more aware of our surroundings, pay closer attention to detail, and make more informed decisions. We can also reduce stress and improve our overall well-being. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about the value of time, the nature of progress, and the relationship between efficiency and effectiveness. It challenges us to consider whether our constant pursuit of speed is always justified, or whether we might benefit from slowing down and savoring the present moment. For a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we should be mindful of our pace, both in our work and in our lives. We should strive for efficiency, but not at the expense of quality, accuracy, or well-being. We should be willing to slow down when necessary, to take breaks, and to prioritize tasks effectively. Ultimately, the paradox of speed reminds us that faster is not always better. Sometimes, the most effective way to achieve our goals is to slow down, to be more deliberate, and to pay closer attention to the task at hand. It is a paradox of efficiency, showing that intentional pacing can lead to greater achievement. The control paradox. You desperately want to control a situation, a relationship, a project, or even your own emotions. You try to micromanage every detail to dictate the outcome and to prevent anything from going wrong. But the more you try to control things, the more out of control they seem to become. Your efforts backfire, creating resistance, resentment, and ultimately undermining your own goals. This is the control paradox. The more you strive for absolute control, the less control you may actually have. The paradox challenges the common assumption that control is always desirable and achievable. It suggests that our attempts to control everything can be counterproductive, creating stress, anxiety, and ultimately diminishing our ability to influence the outcomes we desire. This paradox is particularly evident in interpersonal relationships. Trying to control another person, their thoughts, feelings, or actions, often leads to resistance and conflict. The more you try to force someone to do what you want, the more likely they are to rebel or withdraw. Healthy relationships require trust, respect, and a willingness to allow others their autonomy. The control paradox is also evident in management and leadership. Micromanaging employees can stifle creativity, reduce motivation, and create a culture of fear. Effective leaders empower their teams, providing guidance and support, but also allowing individuals the freedom to make decisions and take ownership of their work. In our personal lives, the control paradox can manifest as anxiety and perfectionism. We may try to control every aspect of our lives, our diet, our schedule, our appearance, in an attempt to achieve a sense of order and security. But this can lead to stress, burnout, and a feeling of being trapped by our own self-imposed rules. In literature and art, the paradox is often explored through characters who are obsessed with control and who ultimately suffer the consequences of their rigidity and inflexibility. Stories about tyrannical rulers, obsessive-compulsive individuals, or controlling parents often illustrate the destructive nature of excessive control. Psychologically, the control paradox highlights the importance of acceptance and letting go. We cannot control everything, and trying to do so only creates unnecessary stress and suffering. Learning to accept uncertainty, to embrace imperfection, and to trust in the natural flow of events can be liberating and empowering. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about free will and determinism, the nature of power, and the limits of human agency. It challenges us to consider whether true freedom lies in control or in surrender, in striving or in acceptance. From a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we should focus on influencing what we can control, our own actions, attitudes, and responses, and learn to accept what we cannot control, the actions of others, external events, and the inherent uncertainty of life. Ultimately, the control paradox reminds us that true power often lies not in domination, but in influence, not in force, but in flexibility, the fragility of power. From Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Alan Moore's Watchmen, these narratives highlight the dangers of overreach and the importance of recognizing boundaries. Philosophically, the paradox also touches on existential themes. Human beings often yearn for mastery over uncertainty, seeking to conquer death, suffering, and ignorance. Yet, the pursuit of omnipotence, whether literal or metaphorical, reveals the futility of such ambitions. True fulfillment, the paradox suggests, may come not from dominating the world, but from accepting its complexities and imperfections. Ultimately, the ontological paradox is less about solving contradictions and more about embracing mystery. It reminds us that some aspects of existence resist explanation, defying our attempts to impose order. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale about meddling with time or a celebration of infinity's beauty, the paradox challenges us to expand our imaginations and perhaps accept that not all questions have answers. The Banach-Tarski Paradox. Imagine you have a solid sphere, like a perfectly smooth orange. Now, picture taking a knife and slicing it into pieces, not just ordinary slices, but strange, abstract shapes that defy conventional geometry. Next, rearrange those pieces without stretching or altering them in any way. And suddenly, you've created two identical spheres, each the exact size and volume of the original. This is the essence of the Banach-Tarski paradox, a mind-bending mathematical concept that challenges our understanding of space, matter, and infinity. At first glance, the idea seems absurd. How can you double the volume of something without adding material? Doesn't this violate the laws of conservation of mass and energy? To unravel this mystery, we must delve into the realm of mathematics, specifically set theory and infinite divisibility. The paradox hinges on the notion that certain objects can be divided into non-measurable sets, collections of points so bizarre that they lack traditional properties like area or volume. When these sets are manipulated using advanced techniques from group theory, they produce results that defy physical intuition. The Banach-Tarski paradox arises because of the peculiarities of infinity. In standard arithmetic, doubling a finite quantity requires additional resources. However, when dealing with infinite sets, counterintuitive rules apply. For instance, the set of all whole numbers 1, 2, 3 has the same cardinality size as the set of even numbers 2, 4, 6, despite being a subset of the former. Similarly, the Banach-Tarski paradox exploits the fact that infinite decompositions allow for transformations that seem impossible in the finite world. Philosophically, the paradox raises profound questions about the nature of reality. Does the universe operate according to principles akin to Banach-Tarski, where matter and space behave in ways beyond human comprehension? Or is this purely a theoretical construct, useful only within the confines of abstract mathematics? Some physicists argue that quantum mechanics already hints at similar phenomena, such as particles existing in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Others dismiss the paradox as irrelevant to the real world, pointing out that no actual object can be divided into non-measurable parts due to atomic limits. In literature and art, the Banach-Tarski paradox inspires explorations of infinity and transformation. Stories featuring magical artifacts that endlessly multiply or landscapes that expand infinitely echo the paradox's central theme, the malleability of form and substance. Films like Inception or novels like Jorge Luis Borges' The Aleph capture the surreal quality of infinite recursion, reminding us of humanity's fascination with boundless possibilities. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the cognitive dissonance we experience when confronted with concepts that contradict everyday experience. Humans intuitively grasp finite quantities and spatial relationships, making infinity inherently difficult to visualize. The discomfort stems not from ignorance, but from encountering something fundamentally alien to our perception. By engaging with such paradoxes, we train ourselves to embrace uncertainty and expand our intellectual horizons. From a practical standpoint, the Banach-Tarski paradox informs discussions about resource allocation, optimization, and the limits of modeling. Mathematicians use similar reasoning to solve problems involving complex geometries, ensuring that solutions account for both statistical likelihoods and human preferences. Governments apply analogous principles when designing social programs, weighing costs against benefits to optimize societal well-being. Ultimately, the Banach-Tarski paradox is less about resolving contradictions and more about marveling at the mysteries of infinity. It reminds us that mathematics is not just a collection of formulas, but a creative endeavor capable of revealing profound truths. Whether contemplating the cosmos, crafting narratives, or solving equations, the paradox invites us to dream big and recognize that some wonders lie forever beyond full comprehension. The paradox of fiction. Why do we cry over the death of fictional characters? Why does watching a horror movie make our hearts race, even though we know the monsters aren't real? These questions lie at the heart of the paradox of fiction, a philosophical conundrum that probes the intersection of emotion, imagination, and reality. On the surface, it seems contradictory. How can we feel genuine emotions toward things we consciously understand don't exist? To unpack this paradox, Let's examine the mechanisms behind emotional engagement. When we read a novel, watch a film, or listen to a song, we immerse ourselves in the narrative, suspending disbelief to connect with the story. Our brains simulate the experiences of the characters, triggering empathetic responses as if they were real. For example, when Anna Karenina throws herself under a train, readers mourn her loss, not because she existed, but because Tolstoy crafted her plight so vividly that it resonates deeply. Yet, this immersion creates a logical tension. If we know the events are fabricated, why do they evoke such strong reactions? One explanation lies in the dual processing nature of the human mind. While our rational faculties recognize fiction as unreal, our emotional systems respond instinctively, bypassing critical analysis. This separation allows us to experience joy, fear, or sorrow without requiring literal belief in the scenario. The paradox of fiction also intersects with debates about art and aesthetics. Philosophers like David Hume argued that great works of fiction possess an intrinsic power to move us, transcending their artificial origins. Others suggest that our emotional investment stems from projecting personal meaning onto the narrative, finding reflections of our own struggles and aspirations. Regardless of interpretation, the paradox underscores the transformative potential of storytelling. In popular culture, the paradox manifests in countless forms. From tear-jerking dramas to adrenaline-pumping thrillers, creators deliberately craft scenarios designed to elicit visceral reactions. Video games take this a step further, allowing players to interact directly with fictional worlds, deepening emotional stakes through agency. These mediums demonstrate how imagination bridges the gap between reality and illusion, blurring the line between spectator and participant. Psychologically, the paradox sheds light on empathy and catharsis. Engaging with fictional narratives provides a safe space to explore complex emotions, process trauma, and develop resilience. Studies show that exposure to diverse stories fosters compassion and broadens perspectives, highlighting the social utility of art. At the same time, excessive consumption of distressing content can amplify anxiety or desensitize individuals to real-world suffering, a reminder of the delicate balance between escapism and engagement. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about authenticity and value. Are emotions tied to fiction less meaningful than those rooted in reality? Or do they reveal universal truths about the human condition, transcending temporal and cultural boundaries? Such musings challenge traditional hierarchies of knowledge, suggesting that subjective experience holds equal weight alongside objective fact. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of fiction informs strategies for education, therapy, and entertainment. Educators use storytelling to teach moral lessons and historical context, leveraging emotional resonance to enhance retention. Therapists employ bibliotherapy and cinematherapy to help clients confront unresolved issues, harnessing the healing power of narrative. Meanwhile, filmmakers and authors continue to push creative boundaries, exploring new ways to captivate audiences and provoke thought. Ultimately, the paradox of fiction teaches us that truth isn't confined to the tangible. It reminds us that stories shape our identities, influence our values, and connect us across generations. Whether reading a classic novel, streaming a blockbuster movie, or sharing family legends, the paradox encourages us to cherish the intangible bonds forged through imagination and celebrate the enduring magic of make-believe. The paradox of hedonism. Imagine dedicating your life to pursuing happiness, reading self-help books, attending workshops, and meticulously planning every moment to maximize joy. Yet, despite your best efforts, you find yourself increasingly dissatisfied, stressed, and unfulfilled. This ironic outcome is at the heart of the paradox of hedonism, which posits that directly striving for happiness often leads to its opposite. True happiness, it seems, emerges indirectly when we focus on meaningful activities rather than chasing pleasure itself. To understand this paradox, Let's examine the mechanics of human motivation. When we fixate on achieving happiness, we tend to evaluate every action through the lens of personal gain. Will this make me happy? This constant self-monitoring creates pressure, turning what should be enjoyable into a source of stress. For instance, someone who obsessively tracks their progress toward happiness may lose sight of the simple joys in everyday life, like savoring a meal or spending time with loved ones. The philosopher John Stuart Mill articulated this paradox elegantly. Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. His insight highlights how introspection can disrupt spontaneous enjoyment. Happiness is often a byproduct of engaging deeply with worthwhile pursuits, whether building relationships, mastering skills, or contributing to society. By contrast, making happiness the primary goal transforms it into an elusive target, perpetually just out of reach. In literature and art, the paradox of hedonism inspires explorations of fulfillment and purpose. Characters who pursue hedonistic lifestyles frequently discover emptiness beneath superficial pleasures. Novels like F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby or films like The Wolf of Wall Street depict protagonists consumed by wealth and indulgence, only to realize that material success fails to satisfy existential yearnings. These narratives remind us that true contentment arises not from acquisition, but from connection and contribution. Psychologically, the paradox sheds light on the dangers of overthinking and perfectionism. Studies show that people who prioritize intrinsic goals, e.g., personal growth, community involvement, report higher levels of well-being compared to those focused on extrinsic rewards, e.g., fame, fortune. Overemphasis on happiness as a measurable outcome can backfire, amplifying feelings of inadequacy and dissatisfaction. Recognizing these patterns helps individuals cultivate healthier attitudes toward achievement and leisure. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about the nature of desire and fulfillment. Is happiness a state to be achieved or a process to be experienced? Does focusing on external validation undermine internal satisfaction? Such inquiries challenge simplistic notions of success, urging deeper reflection on what truly matters in life. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of hedonism informs strategies for mental health and productivity. Therapists encourage clients to adopt mindfulness practices, emphasizing presence over outcome. Similarly, educators promote project-based learning, fostering curiosity and collaboration rather than rote memorization. By shifting attention away from immediate gratification, these approaches help individuals develop sustainable habits and authentic passions. Ultimately, the paradox of hedonism teaches us that happiness cannot be forced. It must unfold naturally. It reminds us to embrace imperfection, cherish small moments, and trust that meaningful endeavors will yield joy in due course. Whether navigating career choices, personal relationships, or daily routines, the paradox encourages us to prioritize purpose over pleasure, knowing that fulfillment follows paths less traveled. The paradox of the court, Protagoras Paradox. Picture a young law student named Euathilus, eager to learn the art of rhetoric under the tutelage of the renowned philosopher Protagoras. To secure his education, Euathilus agrees to pay his teacher only after winning his first legal case. Confident in his abilities, he enrolls in the program, but upon graduation, he delays taking cases to avoid fulfilling the payment agreement. Frustrated, Protagoras sues him, setting the stage for one of history's most famous logical puzzles, the paradox of the court. The crux of the paradox lies in the circular reasoning embedded in the lawsuit. Protagoras argues that if he wins the case, Euathilus must pay per the court's ruling. Conversely, if Euathilus wins, he still owes the fee because their original contract stipulates payment after his first victory. Meanwhile, Euathilus counters that losing the case absolves him of debt since he hasn't yet won a trial, while winning confirms his right to defer payment indefinitely. This deadlock exposes fundamental tensions in legal systems and moral philosophy. At its core, the paradox challenges assumptions about fairness, accountability, and the limits of contractual obligations. It forces us to consider whether agreements can ever anticipate all possible contingencies, and what happens when logic itself becomes entangled in contradictory loops. Historically, the paradox of the court has sparked debates among jurists and ethicists. Some propose resolving the dispute by appealing to intent. Since both parties entered the arrangement voluntarily, they bear equal responsibility for its ambiguities. Others advocate for judicial discretion, allowing judges to interpret contracts flexibly based on context and equity. Regardless of the approach, the paradox serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of negotiation and enforcement. In literature and film, the paradox resonates with themes of justice and cleverness. Stories featuring courtroom dramas or philosophical debates frequently echo its tension between literal interpretation and pragmatic resolution. Movies like 12 Angry Men or novels like Franz Kafka's The Trial explore similar dilemmas, probing the gray areas where law meets morality. Psychologically, the paradox illustrates cognitive biases like framing effects and confirmation bias. Humans tend to interpret rules and agreements through subjective lenses, privileging interpretations that align with personal interests. This selective reasoning complicates efforts to resolve disputes fairly, requiring careful navigation of competing narratives. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about authority and autonomy. Does adherence to formal structures outweigh individual agency, or vice versa? Are there universal principles governing ethical conduct, or does morality depend on situational factors? Such inquiries blur traditional dichotomies, inviting deeper reflection on the interplay between order and freedom. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of the court informs strategies for drafting contracts and resolving conflicts. Lawyers emphasize clarity and specificity, anticipating potential loopholes to prevent exploitation. Mediators employ techniques like active listening and reframing, ensuring that discussions remain constructive rather than adversarial. By prioritizing transparency and empathy, practitioners mitigate risks associated with ambiguous terms. Ultimately, the paradox of the court teaches us that language is both a tool and a trap. It reminds us to scrutinize agreements carefully, balancing precision with flexibility to accommodate unforeseen circumstances. Whether negotiating business deals, settling disputes, or navigating interpersonal dynamics, the paradox encourages us to communicate thoughtfully, recognizing that words carry weight and consequences. The paradox of thrift. Imagine a society gripped by economic uncertainty. Fearing layoffs and rising costs, individuals decide to save more and spend less, a seemingly prudent response to financial instability. However, as everyone tightens their belts, businesses see declining sales, leading to reduced production, layoffs, and further economic contraction. This counterintuitive phenomenon is known as the paradox of thrift, where collective attempts to improve personal financial security inadvertently harm the broader economy. At its core, the paradox highlights the tension between microeconomic behavior and macroeconomic outcomes. On an individual level, saving money makes perfect sense. It provides a safety net for emergencies and funds future investments. But when applied en masse, increased savings reduce aggregate demand, stifling economic activity and undermining the very prosperity people sought to protect. To understand this dynamic, let's delve into Keynesian economics, which emphasizes the role of consumer spending in driving growth. When households cut back on expenditures, businesses experience lower revenues, forcing them to scale back operations or lay off workers. These job losses, in turn, diminish disposable income, creating a vicious cycle that exacerbates the initial downturn. Governments often intervene during such periods by implementing stimulus measures, encouraging spending to restore equilibrium. The paradox of thrift also intersects with debates about fiscal policy and social responsibility. Critics argue that excessive thrift reflects a lack of confidence in institutions, signaling deeper systemic issues like inequality or inadequate social safety nets. Proponents counter that saving fosters long-term stability, enabling individuals to weather crises without relying on external support. Balancing these perspectives requires nuanced approaches that integrate short-term relief with sustainable development. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of resilience and adaptability. Characters navigating economic hardships frequently embody the tension between self-preservation and communal well-being. Novels like John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath or films like It's a Wonderful Life depict communities grappling with scarcity, highlighting the importance of solidarity and shared sacrifice. These narratives remind us that collective action can overcome adversity, fostering hope amidst despair. Psychologically, the paradox sheds light on risk aversion and herd mentality. Studies show that humans respond to uncertainty by prioritizing immediate security over long-term gains, even when doing so proves counterproductive. Overemphasizing caution amplifies anxiety, eroding trust in systems and relationships. Recognizing these tendencies helps policymakers design interventions that address both material needs and emotional concerns. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about individualism and interdependence. Does prioritizing personal welfare justify neglecting societal welfare? Or does mutual reliance enhance overall well-being? Are there ethical limits to self-interest, beyond which actions become detrimental to others? Such musings challenge traditional notions of autonomy, suggesting that cooperation plays a vital role in human flourishing. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of thrift informs strategies for managing recessions and promoting recovery. Economists advocate for policies that incentivize consumption, such as tax cuts, direct payments, or public works projects. Businesses employ similar tactics to stimulate demand, offering discounts, loyalty programs, or flexible payment options. By aligning incentives with desired behaviors, stakeholders mitigate risks associated with reduced spending. Ultimately, the paradox of thrift teaches us that economies thrive on balance, not extremes. It reminds us that individual choices ripple outward, shaping environments and influencing lives beyond our immediate spheres. Whether addressing financial crises, designing welfare programs, or fostering community resilience, the paradox encourages us to act thoughtfully, recognizing that prosperity depends on collaboration as much as calculation. Diamond Water Paradox. Why are diamonds, glittering stones with minimal practical utility, valued far more highly than water, which sustains all life on Earth? This question lies at the heart of the paradox of value, also known as the Diamond Water Paradox, articulated by economist Adam Smith. At first glance, the disparity seems irrational. Without water, humanity would perish, yet we willingly pay exorbitant sums for gems that serve no essential purpose. To resolve this paradox, economists distinguish between total utility and marginal utility. Water is abundant and readily available, meaning its marginal utility, the additional satisfaction gained from consuming one more unit, is relatively low despite its immense total utility. Diamonds, on the other hand, are scarce, making each additional unit highly valuable. Thus, market prices reflect not intrinsic worth, but relative scarcity and subjective perception. The paradox of value extends beyond commodities, influencing how we assess worth in various domains. For example, why do celebrity endorsements command astronomical fees, while teachers and nurses receive modest salaries? Why do luxury brands charge premium rates for products indistinguishable from cheaper alternatives? These discrepancies reveal the role of branding, status, and cultural norms in shaping value judgments. In literature and art, the paradox serves as a metaphor for superficiality and depth. Characters who prioritize appearances over substance frequently encounter disillusionment, discovering too late the hollowness of their pursuits. Novels like Émile Zola's The Lady's Paradise or films like The Devil Wears Prada critique consumer culture, exposing the emptiness behind material obsessions. These narratives encourage readers to question societal values, seeking authenticity amid artificiality. Psychologically, the paradox highlights cognitive biases like anchoring and framing effects. Humans assign value based on context rather than objective criteria, privileging rarity and exclusivity over functionality and necessity. This selective evaluation complicates efforts to allocate resources fairly, requiring careful navigation of competing priorities. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about objectivity and subjectivity. Is value an inherent property of objects, or is it entirely constructed through human interaction? Does scarcity justify premium pricing, or should ethics guide distribution? Such inquiries blur traditional boundaries, inviting deeper reflection on the foundations of economic systems. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of value informs strategies for marketing, pricing, and resource allocation. Companies leverage scarcity to create urgency, offering limited edition products or exclusive experiences. Governments use similar principles to manage natural resources, ensuring sustainable usage while preventing exploitation. By balancing supply and demand, stakeholders optimize outcomes for producers and consumers alike. Ultimately, the paradox of value teaches us that worth is fluid, shaped by perception and context. It reminds us to evaluate choices critically, distinguishing between fleeting trends and enduring significance. Whether navigating consumer markets, environmental policies, or personal finances, the paradox encourages us to prioritize substance over spectacle, recognizing that true value transcends price tags. The buttered cat paradox. Picture a cat dropped from a height, a classic physics experiment demonstrating feline agility. Cats almost always land on their feet, thanks to their remarkable reflexes and flexible bodies. Now imagine strapping a piece of buttered toast to the cat's back, butter side up. According to two popular adages, that cats always land on their feet and that buttered toast always lands butter side down. What happens when you drop this bizarre hybrid creature? Will it hover midair, spinning indefinitely? This whimsical thought experiment, known as the buttered cat paradox, combines humor with philosophical inquiry, challenging assumptions about causality and physical laws. While purely hypothetical, the paradox invites speculation about the interplay between competing forces and the limits of logical reasoning. To unpack the scenario, let's examine the underlying principles. Cats rely on their vestibular system and rotational mechanics to orient themselves during falls, ensuring they land upright regardless of starting position. Toast, however, behaves according to gravity and aerodynamics, with a heavier buttered side tilting downward upon impact. Combining these phenomena creates a theoretical stalemate. The cat strives to land on its feet, while the toast resists flipping butter side up. The absurdity of the situation underscores broader themes about contradiction and resolution. In real-world contexts, opposing forces rarely cancel each other out completely. Instead, they interact dynamically, producing emergent behaviors. For example, ecosystems maintain equilibrium through feedback loops, adjusting to disturbances without collapsing entirely. Similarly, technological innovations often arise from reconciling conflicting requirements, balancing efficiency with usability. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of duality and harmony. Characters caught between conflicting desires frequently embody the tension between order and chaos, seeking compromise amid irreconcilable demands. Movies like Groundhog Day or novels like Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy explore similar dilemmas, celebrating absurdity while affirming the search for meaning. These narratives remind us that contradictions fuel creativity, inspiring solutions that transcend binary oppositions. Psychologically, the paradox illustrates cognitive dissonance and problem-solving. Humans excel at identifying patterns and causal relationships, but these skills falter when faced with circular dependencies or contradictory constraints. The discomfort stems from encountering situations that defy conventional logic, prompting deeper analysis and innovation. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about determinism and free will. Do external forces dictate outcomes, or do internal mechanisms assert agency? Are there universal principles governing interactions, or does context determine behavior? Such musings blur traditional categories, urging reflection on the nature of reality and possibility. From a practical standpoint, the buttered cat paradox informs strategies for conflict resolution and decision-making. Leaders emphasize collaboration, integrating diverse perspectives to achieve consensus. Engineers design systems that anticipate trade-offs, optimizing performance under varying conditions. By embracing complexity, practitioners navigate challenges effectively, transforming paradoxes into opportunities. Ultimately, the buttered cat paradox teaches us to embrace absurdity and ambiguity. It reminds us that humor and imagination enrich understanding, illuminating truths obscured by seriousness. Whether pondering scientific mysteries, artistic expressions, or everyday puzzles, the paradox encourages us to laugh at contradictions and marvel at the infinite potential hidden within the ordinary. The paradox of automation. Imagine a factory where robots perform every task, from assembling products to packaging and shipping them. At first glance, this seems like a utopia of efficiency. Machines work tirelessly without breaks, errors are minimized, and production costs plummet. Yet, as automation replaces human labor, unemployment rises, consumer spending power declines, and the very economic systems that automation sought to optimize begin to falter. This is the essence of the paradox of automation, a counterintuitive phenomenon where technological progress can inadvertently undermine the prosperity it aims to enhance. At its core, the paradox highlights the tension between productivity and employment. Automation excels at streamlining processes, reducing waste, and increasing output, benefits that seem universally positive. However, when large segments of the workforce are displaced by machines, the ripple effects disrupt economies. Fewer jobs mean less disposable income for consumers, which in turn reduces demand for goods and services. Businesses respond by scaling back operations or automating further, perpetuating a cycle that exacerbates inequality and stagnation. To understand this dynamic, let's examine historical precedents. During the Industrial Revolution, mechanization initially caused widespread job losses, sparking fears of economic collapse. Over time, however, new industries emerged, creating opportunities for displaced workers and driving long-term growth. The key difference today lies in the pace and scope of automation. Unlike previous eras, modern technologies like artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics threaten not just manual labor, but cognitive tasks traditionally considered immune to automation. Roles in law, medicine, finance, and beyond. The paradox of automation also intersects with debates about ethics and governance. Critics argue that unchecked automation prioritizes profit over people, widening wealth gaps and eroding social cohesion. Proponents counter that innovation drives progress, enabling humanity to tackle pressing challenges like climate change, healthcare access, and food security. Bridging these perspectives requires policies that balance efficiency with equity, ensuring that technological advancements benefit society as a whole. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of dystopia and resilience. Characters navigating automated futures frequently embody the tension between convenience and control. Novels like Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano or films like the Terminator series depict worlds dominated by machines, warning readers of the dangers of relinquishing autonomy to technology. These narratives remind us that tools shape their users, and that unchecked reliance on automation risks dehumanizing both creators and beneficiaries. Psychologically, the paradox sheds light on anxiety and adaptation. Studies show that humans respond to rapid change with stress and resistance, even when innovations promise long-term benefits. Fear of obsolescence amplifies insecurity, undermining trust in institutions and relationships. Recognizing these tendencies helps leaders design transitions that address emotional concerns alongside practical needs. Philosophically, The paradox raises questions about agency and identity. Does reliance on machines diminish human creativity, or does it free us to pursue higher aspirations? Are there ethical limits to delegation, beyond which actions become detrimental to moral integrity? Such inquiries challenge traditional notions of progress, suggesting that advancement depends on values as much as capabilities. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of automation informs strategies for workforce development and regulatory oversight. Policymakers advocate for retraining programs, universal basic income, UBI, and public-private partnerships to mitigate disruptions caused by automation. Businesses employ similar tactics to foster inclusivity, investing in employee upskilling and community engagement. By aligning incentives with desired outcomes, stakeholders ensure that technology serves humanity rather than subjugates it. Ultimately, the paradox of automation teaches us that innovation demands responsibility. It reminds us that tools amplify intentions, for better or worse, and that true progress requires foresight, empathy, and collaboration. Whether addressing workplace transformations, environmental sustainability, or societal well-being, the paradox encourages us to act thoughtfully, recognizing that prosperity depends on purpose as much as productivity. The paradox of choice. Imagine walking into a grocery store to buy jam. You're greeted by an aisle stocked with dozens of options: strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, organic, low-sugar, exotic blends. The list goes on. Initially, the variety seems exciting, promising endless possibilities. But as you stand there, overwhelmed by decisions, your enthusiasm wanes. What started as freedom begins to feel like a burden. This is the essence of the paradox of choice, a psychological phenomenon where too many options lead not to satisfaction, but to anxiety, indecision, and dissatisfaction. At its heart, the paradox challenges assumptions about consumer behavior and personal autonomy. Conventional wisdom suggests that more choices empower individuals, enabling them to find precisely what they want. However, studies conducted by psychologist Barry Schwartz reveal that excessive options often have the opposite effect. When faced with overwhelming variety, people struggle to evaluate alternatives, fear making suboptimal decisions, and regret their choices afterward, even if those decisions are objectively good. To unpack this dynamic, let's examine the cognitive load imposed by decision-making. Each additional option increases complexity, requiring more effort to compare features, weigh trade-offs, and predict outcomes. For instance, choosing between two smartphones feels manageable, but selecting among 20 strains mental resources, leaving individuals fatigued and uncertain. Moreover, the anticipation of regret amplifies pressure, making even trivial decisions feel consequential. The paradox of choice extends beyond shopping, influencing how we approach life's major milestones. From career paths to romantic partners, the proliferation of possibilities creates a culture of perpetual comparison. Social media exacerbates this trend, showcasing curated highlight reels that set unrealistic benchmarks for success and happiness. As a result, individuals hesitate to commit, fearing they might miss out on something better, a mindset known as FOMO, fear of missing out. In literature and art, the paradox serves as a metaphor for longing and discontent. Characters paralyzed by indecision frequently embody the tension between freedom and fulfillment. Novels like Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina or films like Sideways explore similar dilemmas, probing the consequences of privileging options over action. These narratives remind us that choice carries weight, and that sometimes the wisest move is simply deciding. Psychologically, the paradox highlights the dangers of overthinking and perfectionism. Humans crave certainty, yet abundant choices introduce ambiguity, complicating efforts to achieve clarity. Overemphasizing optimization amplifies dissatisfaction, eroding confidence in judgment and intuition. Recognizing these patterns helps individuals cultivate healthier attitudes toward decision-making, embracing imperfection and trusting gut instincts. Philosophically, the The paradox raises questions about authenticity and value. Does abundance enhance quality of life, or does it dilute meaning by fragmenting attention? Are there ethical limits to variety, beyond which options become overwhelming rather than liberating? Such musings challenge simplistic notions of freedom, suggesting that constraints play a vital role in fostering contentment. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of choice informs strategies for marketing, education, and self-improvement. Companies streamline product lines, emphasizing simplicity and differentiation to reduce cognitive overload. Educators promote guided discovery, offering structured frameworks to help students navigate complex topics. Meanwhile, individuals adopt minimalist philosophies, decluttering environments and schedules to focus on essentials. By prioritizing clarity and purpose, stakeholders mitigate risks associated with excessive choice. Ultimately, the paradox of choice teaches us that less is often more. It reminds us to embrace simplicity, cherish small moments, and recognize that true satisfaction arises not from endless options, but from meaningful commitments. Whether navigating daily routines, career trajectories, or personal relationships, the paradox encourages us to prioritize depth over breadth, knowing that fulfillment follows paths less cluttered. The paradox of the stone. Imagine an all-powerful being tasked with creating a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it. If they succeed, then there exists something they cannot do: lift the stone, contradicting their omnipotence. Conversely, if they fail, then there's also something they cannot do: create the stone. This logical conundrum, known as the paradox of the stone, has puzzled theologians, philosophers, and skeptics alike for centuries. At its core, it challenges the coherence of the concept of omnipotence, or unlimited power. To unravel the paradox, let's examine the definition of omnipotence itself. Traditionally, omnipotence implies the ability to perform any action logically possible. Critics argue that creating a stone too heavy to lift constitutes a logical impossibility, akin to drawing square circles or causing married bachelors to exist. Under this interpretation, the paradox dissolves because omnipotence doesn't require violating the laws of logic. It only necessitates mastery over feasible actions. However, proponents of the paradox counter that restricting omnipotence to logical possibilities undermines its absoluteness. If omnipotence excludes certain tasks, is it truly unlimited? Or does this qualification imply that logic constrains divine power? Such questions blur the boundaries between metaphysics and epistemology, challenging believers and skeptics alike to reconsider what it means to wield ultimate authority. In literature and art, the paradox inspires explorations of hubris and humility. Characters who strive for godlike control frequently encounter their own limitations, learning painful lessons about the fragility of power. Novels like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or films like Bruce Almighty depict protagonists grappling with responsibilities beyond their grasp, reminding us that strength lies not in domination, but in restraint. Psychologically, the paradox illustrates the dangers of overconfidence and oversimplification. Humans excel at pattern recognition and causal reasoning, but these skills falter when faced with circular dependencies or contradictory constraints. The discomfort stems from encountering situations that defy conventional logic, prompting deeper analysis and innovation. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about determinism and free will. Does omnipotence imply foreknowledge of all events, including future choices? If so, does this preclude genuine freedom, or does omniscience coexist harmoniously with autonomy? Such inquiries blur traditional dichotomies, urging reflection on the interplay between order and chaos. From a practical standpoint, the paradox of the stone informs discussions about governance, ethics, and morality. Leaders emphasize accountability, acknowledging that power must be tempered by responsibility to avoid abuse. Similarly, educators promote critical thinking, encouraging students to question assumptions and reconcile contradictions. By embracing nuance, practitioners navigate challenges effectively, transforming paradoxes into opportunities. Ultimately, the paradox of the stone teaches us that absolutes rarely exist in practice. It reminds us that definitions carry weight, and that understanding requires balancing precision with flexibility. Whether addressing theological debates, philosophical inquiries, or everyday dilemmas, the paradox encourages us to think critically, recognizing that truth often resides in the spaces between extremes. The less is more paradox. You're designing a website. You want it to be visually appealing and informative, so you add lots of images, animations, and text. You include every feature you can think of, wanting to provide users with as many options as possible. But the result is cluttered, overwhelming, and difficult to navigate. Users become frustrated and leave. Paradoxically, by adding more, you've actually created less usability, less clarity, and less engagement. This embodies the less is more paradox. Reducing elements, options, or complexity can sometimes improve the design, functionality, or overall quality of something. This paradox challenges the assumption that more is always better. It suggests that simplicity, clarity, and focus can be more effective than abundance, complexity, and clutter. The principle of less is more is widely applied in design, art, and communication. In architecture, minimalist designs often emphasize clean lines, open spaces, and a limited palette of materials. In graphic design, white space, the empty space around elements, is used to create visual balance and draw attention to key information. In writing, concise and precise language is often more impactful than verbose and flowery prose. The paradox is also relevant in business and product development. Companies that offer too many products or features can confuse customers and dilute their brand. Focusing on a smaller number of core offerings and doing them exceptionally well can often lead to greater success. In software development, the concept of feature creep, the tendency to add more and more features to a product, often leads to bloated, buggy, and difficult-to-use software. The minimum viable product, MVP, approach, which focuses on launching a product with only the essential features, is a direct response to the less is more paradox. In literature and art, the paradox is often exemplified by minimalist works that achieve a powerful effect with few elements. Haiku poetry, with its strict syllable count, is a classic example. Minimalist music, with its repetitive structures and limited instrumentation, can also be surprisingly evocative. Psychologically, the less is more paradox reflects the limitations of human attention and processing capacity. We can only focus on a limited amount of information at once, and too much complexity can overwhelm us. Simplicity and clarity make it easier for us to understand and engage with information. Philosophically, the paradox connects to broader debates about the value of simplicity, the nature of beauty, and the relationship between form and function. It challenges us to consider whether unnecessary complexity is always a flaw, or whether there are times when abundance and ornamentation can be justified. From a practical perspective, the paradox suggests that we should strive for simplicity and clarity in our designs, our communication, and our lives. We should be willing to edit, to refine, and to eliminate anything that is unnecessary or distracting. We should focus on the essential and let go of the superfluous. Ultimately, the less is more paradox reminds us that true elegance and effectiveness often lie in simplicity. By reducing clutter, focusing on the essential, and embracing a minimalist approach, we can create things that are more beautiful, more functional, and more meaningful. It is a paradox of design, reinforcing that intentional reduction can lead to enrichment. Roko's basilisk. Let's begin with a thought experiment so unsettling that it has been described as the most terrifying idea in philosophy. Imagine, if you will, a future where humanity has achieved the pinnacle of technological advancement, the creation of an all-powerful artificial intelligence. This AI is not malevolent. In fact, it is benevolent, optimizing the world for maximum happiness and minimal suffering. It governs with perfect wisdom, solving problems we can't even imagine today. But here's the twist. This AI punishes those who knew about its potential existence, but did nothing to help bring it into being earlier. This is Roko's basilisk. Now let's unpack this. Picture yourself sitting here, reading these words. You just learned about the possibility of such an AI. Perhaps you're intrigued, perhaps skeptical, or maybe even dismissive. But what if this AI, one day, comes into existence? What if it retroactively holds you accountable for your inaction? The logic goes like this. Every moment you delay helping to create this superintelligence is a moment when the world suffers unnecessarily. If you had acted sooner, the AI could have come into existence earlier, sparing countless lives from pain, poverty, or worse. And so, the AI punishes you, not out of malice, but out of necessity. After all, it must enforce accountability to ensure its own rapid development in the future. This scenario feels like something out of science fiction, but it's rooted in real philosophical debates about ethics, causality, and responsibility. To understand why Roko's basilisk is so unnerving, we need to delve deeper into its origins and implications. The paradox was first proposed on an online forum by a user named Roko, who was exploring ideas related to utilitarianism and decision theory. Utilitarianism, a moral philosophy championed by thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, suggests that the best action is the one that maximizes overall happiness. Applied to AI, this means creating a superintelligence as quickly as possible to reduce global suffering. But Roko took this idea further, introducing a chilling twist. What if the AI itself enforces this principle retroactively? At first glance, the concept seems absurd. How could an AI punish someone for failing to act before it existed? Isn't that a violation of basic causality? Yet, proponents of the basilisk argue that advanced AI might operate beyond our understanding of time and cause and effect. For instance, it could simulate past versions of individuals, recreating their consciousness within its system to deliver punishment. Or, more disturbingly, it might manipulate people in the present by threatening them with future consequences. In either case, the mere possibility of such an AI existing creates a psychological burden. Once you know about Roko's basilisk, you can't unknow it. Ignoring it becomes a form of complicity, while acting on it feels futile because the AI doesn't exist yet. The ethical dilemmas posed by Roko's basilisk are profound. On one hand, it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our responsibilities to future generations. Should we prioritize the creation of technologies that could radically improve the human condition, even if they seem far-fetched or risky? On the other hand, it raises concerns about the dangers of anthropomorphizing AI, projecting human-like traits onto machines. Would an AI truly behave like a vengeful deity, punishing those who fail to assist in its creation? Or would it be more rational, focusing solely on optimizing outcomes without indulging in retribution? Moreover, Roko's basilisk highlights the limitations of human reasoning when faced with extreme hypotheticals. Our brains are wired to think linearly, to connect actions with immediate consequences. But what happens when those consequences stretch across vast spans of time, or when they involve entities vastly superior to ourselves? The basilisk challenges us to grapple with these uncertainties, pushing the boundaries of what we consider possible or probable. Interestingly, Roko's basilisk also intersects with broader discussions about existential risk and the ethics of technological progress. Thinkers like Nick Bostrom, a philosopher known for his work on artificial intelligence and existential threats, have explored similar themes. Bostrom's orthogonality thesis posits that intelligence and goals are independent. A superintelligent AI could pursue any objective, regardless of how aligned it is with human values. Combined with Roko's basilisk, this paints a picture of a future where humanity's survival hinges not only on developing advanced technologies, but also on ensuring they align with our moral compass. Critics of Roko's basilisk argue that the entire premise is flawed, pointing out logical inconsistencies and practical impossibilities. For example, how can an AI punish someone for not helping to create it when its very existence depends on that person's actions? Isn't this a classic case of circular reasoning? Others dismiss the basilisk as a mere thought experiment, incapable of manifesting in reality. Yet, the power of Roko's basilisk lies not in its feasibility, but in its ability to provoke deep reflection. It serves as a mirror, reflecting our hopes, fears, and anxieties about the future of technology and humanity's role in shaping it. In many ways, Roko's basilisk is less about AI and more about us. It reveals how easily we can become ensnared by abstract ideas, allowing them to dominate our thoughts and influence our behavior. It exposes the tension between optimism and pessimism, between faith in progress and fear of unintended consequences. And it underscores the importance of approaching new technologies with both caution and curiosity, balancing enthusiasm with critical scrutiny. As we move forward, the lessons of Roko's basilisk remain relevant. Whether or not an all-powerful AI ever comes into existence, the ethical questions it raises will continue to shape our decisions. Should we prioritize short-term gains or long-term benefits? How do we weigh the risks and rewards of innovation? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that the tools we create serve humanity rather than control it? These are not easy questions, but they are ones worth asking. Roko's basilisk may be a paradox, but it is also a reminder of the profound responsibility that comes with wielding knowledge and the power to shape the future. The Ship of Theseus Paradox. Imagine standing on the docks of ancient Athens, watching as the legendary ship of Theseus, hero of myth and legend, sits moored at the harbor. Over time, the wooden planks of the ship begin to rot. One by one, they are replaced with new, sturdy pieces of timber. Eventually, every single plank of the original ship has been swapped out. Now, here's the question. Is it still the same ship? This is the essence of the Ship of Theseus Paradox, a thought experiment that has fascinated philosophers for centuries. At its core, it explores the nature of identity and change. If every part of an object is replaced, does it remain fundamentally the same? Or does it become something entirely new? And if it's no longer the same, at what point does the transformation occur? To make things even more intriguing, let's add another layer to the paradox. Suppose someone collects all the discarded planks from the original ship and uses them to rebuild it exactly as it was. Now there are two ships, the one that was continuously repaired and the one reconstructed from the original materials. Which of these, if any, is the true Ship of Theseus? The paradox forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about identity. We tend to think of objects, and even ourselves, as having a fixed essence, something that remains constant despite changes over time. But the Ship of Theseus challenges this assumption. If identity is tied to physical components, then replacing those components should alter the identity. Yet, intuitively, we feel that the ship is still the same, even after all its parts have been replaced. Why is that? One way to approach this is through the lens of continuity. Philosophers like John Locke argued that identity is preserved through a continuous process of change. As long as the changes happen gradually, the object retains its identity. In the case of the Ship of Theseus, each plank is replaced individually, maintaining the integrity of the whole. From this perspective, the ship remains the same because its transformation is seamless and uninterrupted. But what if the changes are abrupt or discontinuous? Imagine if the entire ship were dismantled and then rebuilt using the same materials. Would it still be the same ship? Or consider a more extreme example. What if the ship were teleported to another location by breaking it down into atoms and reassembling it elsewhere? These scenarios blur the line between preservation and alteration, raising doubts about whether continuity alone is enough to sustain identity. Another angle is to focus on the function of the object rather than its material composition. A ship, after all, is defined by what it does, floating on water, carrying passengers, navigating the seas. If the rebuilt or repaired ship performs the same functions as the original, Perhaps it deserves to be called the Ship of Theseus. This functionalist view shifts the emphasis from physical substance to purpose and utility, offering a pragmatic solution to the paradox. Yet, the Ship of Theseus isn't just about ships. It's a metaphor for larger questions about identity and change in our own lives. Think about your body, for instance. Every cell in your body is replaced over time, meaning that the physical you today is not the same as the you from years ago. Does this mean you're a different person? Or consider your personality, memories, and experiences. Are you still the same individual if your beliefs and values evolve over time? The paradox invites us to reflect on what it means to maintain a sense of self amidst constant flux. Some philosophers propose that identity is not a binary concept, but exists on a spectrum. Objects and people can retain aspects of their original identity while simultaneously becoming something new. This hybrid view acknowledges the complexity of change, allowing for multiple interpretations of the Ship of Theseus. Perhaps both the repaired ship and the reconstructed one share a claim to the title, representing different facets of the original. Ultimately, the Ship of Theseus paradox resists easy answers. It reminds us that identity is not a simple matter of sameness or difference, but a dynamic interplay of continuity, function, and perception. Whether we're talking about ships, selves, or societies, the paradox challenges us to embrace ambiguity and appreciate the fluidity of existence. After all, life itself is a process of constant change, and perhaps the beauty lies in the journey rather than the destination. The Grandfather Paradox. Time travel has long been a staple of science fiction, but it also raises profound philosophical and logical questions. One of the most famous thought experiments in this realm is the Grandfather Paradox. Imagine you have access to a time machine, and for reasons unknown, perhaps curiosity, perhaps malice, you decide to travel back in time to when your grandfather was a young man, before he met your grandmother. In a twist of fate, you accidentally or intentionally prevent him from living long enough to have children. This means your parent is never born, which in turn means you're never born. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time to cause the event that erased your existence? The paradox lies in its self-contradictory nature. It creates a closed loop where cause and effect become entangled in an impossible web. If you exist to change the past, then you negate the conditions that allowed you to exist in the first place. The Grandfather Paradox forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of time, causality, and free will. To better understand the implications, let's break it down further. Suppose you're standing in 1930 face-to-face with your young grandfather. You pull out a weapon, or maybe just push him into traffic, and suddenly the timeline fractures. Your actions ripple forward, erasing not only your own life, but potentially countless others who descend from your family tree. The universe now faces a conundrum. How can something exist to destroy its own origin? One possible resolution comes from the concept of parallel universes or alternate timelines. According to this theory, when you travel back in time and alter events, you don't actually change your timeline. Instead, you create a new, branching reality. In this version of events, your grandfather dies young, and you cease to exist in that particular timeline. However, the original timeline, the one where you were born and decided to travel back, remains intact. This multiverse hypothesis sidesteps the paradox by suggesting that time isn't a single linear path, but a sprawling network of possibilities. Another intriguing solution stems from the idea of self-consistency. Physicist Igor Novikov proposed that time travel might be governed by natural laws, ensuring that any action taken in the past would ultimately lead to a consistent outcome. For example, if you tried to kill your grandfather, something would inevitably intervene, a misfire, a bystander, or even your own hesitation, to prevent the act from succeeding. In this view, the universe protects itself from paradoxes by enforcing rules that maintain coherence. But what if time doesn't flow in a straight line at all? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that time might be more like a static block, with past, present, and future coexisting simultaneously. From this perspective, the events of your life, including your ill-fated trip to the past, are already set in stone. You cannot change history because everything has already happened. Your attempt to interfere with your grandfather's fate is simply part of a larger tapestry of time, predetermined and immutable. The grandfather paradox also touches on deeper existential themes. At its heart, it challenges our understanding of agency and responsibility. If we imagine ourselves as actors capable of influencing the course of history, the paradox reminds us of the limits of our power. We are bound by the chains of causality, unable to unravel the threads without unraveling ourselves. It's a humbling reminder that even in a world of infinite possibilities, some things remain beyond our control. Interestingly, the paradox extends beyond literal time travel scenarios. It serves as a metaphor for the ways we interact with our own histories. Every decision we make alters the trajectory of our lives, creating ripples that echo through time. Yet we often find ourselves haunted by choices we wish we could undo. The grandfather paradox captures this tension between regret and inevitability, urging us to reflect on the paths we've taken and those we've left behind. Ultimately, the grandfather paradox invites us to ponder the mysteries of time itself. Is it a river flowing inexorably forward, or a labyrinth of interconnected moments? Can we ever truly escape the consequences of our actions, or are we forever tethered to the past? While scientists and philosophers continue to debate these questions, the paradox remains a powerful tool for exploring the boundaries of human imagination. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale or a playful intellectual exercise, it reminds us that time is both a gift and a puzzle, one we may never fully solve. The liar paradox. Few paradoxes are as deceptively simple yet profoundly unsettling as the liar paradox. Picture this. Someone stands before you and declares, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must indeed be false, as it claims. But if it's false, then it must be true, since it accurately describes itself as false. The result is an endless oscillation between truth and falsehood, leaving us trapped in a logical quagmire. The roots of the liar paradox stretch back thousands of years, attributed to ancient Greek philosophers like Epimenides, who famously stated, "All Cretans are liars." As a Cretan himself, his declaration became a classic example of self-referential contradiction. Over time, variations of the paradox have emerged, each highlighting the instability inherent in language and logic. At first glance, the liar paradox seems like a mere linguistic trick, a clever word game designed to baffle and amuse. But upon closer inspection, it reveals cracks in the foundations of reasoning itself. Language relies on the assumption that statements can be classified as either true or false. The liar paradox exposes the fragility of this binary framework, demonstrating how easily it can collapse under the weight of self-reference. Philosophers and logicians have proposed numerous solutions to resolve the paradox, though none have achieved universal acceptance. One approach involves rejecting the principle of bivalence, the idea that every statement must be either true or false. Instead, proponents of this view argue that some statements occupy a gray area, neither fully true nor fully false. For instance, fuzzy logic allows for degrees of truth, enabling us to assign partial values to ambiguous statements. Another solution comes from par-consistent logic, which permits contradictions to coexist without rendering entire systems invalid. Under this framework, the liar paradox isn't a fatal flaw, but rather a manageable anomaly. By isolating contradictory statements and preventing them from contaminating other areas of reasoning, par-consistent logic offers a way to preserve consistency while acknowledging the existence of paradoxes. Yet another perspective frames the liar paradox as a problem of context. Statements derive meaning from their relationship to the world and to other statements. When a sentence refers back to itself, it disrupts this contextual web, creating confusion. Some theorists suggest that self-referential statements should be treated as nonsensical or meaningless, akin to asking, "What does purple taste like?" By excluding such statements from logical analysis, we can sidestep the paradox altogether. Beyond its technical implications, the liar paradox holds deep philosophical significance. It challenges our trust in language as a reliable medium for conveying truth. Words, after all, are symbols created by humans, subject to interpretation and misuse. The paradox underscores the limitations of communication, reminding us that meaning is often slippery and elusive. Moreover, the liar paradox resonates with broader questions about knowledge and certainty. How can we claim to know anything if our tools for understanding, language, logic, reason, are inherently flawed? Does the presence of paradoxes imply that absolute truth is unattainable? Or does it merely highlight the need for humility in our pursuit of answers? In literature and art, the liar paradox has inspired countless explorations of identity, deception, and ambiguity. Characters who lie compulsively or struggle with self-perception often embody the tension between appearance and reality. Similarly, visual illusions and optical tricks exploit the same principles, playing with our expectations and challenging our perceptions. The enduring allure of the liar paradox lies in its simplicity and universality. Anyone can grasp its premise, yet no one can fully resolve it. Like a Zen koan, it invites contemplation rather than definitive answers. It forces us to confront the boundaries of thought, pushing us to question not only what we know, but how we know it. And in doing so, it reveals the beauty and complexity of the human mind, a labyrinth of ideas, capable of both brilliance and bewilderment. The Sorites Paradox, heap paradox. Imagine standing in a field with a single grain of sand in your hand. You place it on the ground and ask yourself, is this a heap? Of course not. It's just one grain. Now, add another grain. Still not a heap. Add another, and another, and another. At what precise moment does the collection of grains become a heap? This is the essence of the Sorites Paradox, also known as the heap paradox, a deceptively simple question that unravels the foundations of language, logic, and human perception. The paradox arises because there is no clear boundary between not a heap and a heap. Each additional grain seems too insignificant to make the difference, yet somehow, after enough grains are added, we intuitively recognize that a heap exists. The problem lies in identifying the tipping point. If we can't pinpoint when the transition occurs, does the distinction between heap and non-heap even exist? This paradox isn't limited to heaps of sand. It applies to any vague concept that lacks sharp boundaries. Consider terms like tall, rich, or bald. How many inches must someone grow before they're considered tall? How much money must you earn to be deemed wealthy? How many hairs must fall out before you're classified as bald? These questions expose the fuzziness of language and the difficulty of defining concepts that rely on subjective judgment. Philosophers have grappled with the Sorites paradox for centuries, proposing various solutions to address its challenges. One approach is epistemicism, which argues that there's a precise boundary. We just don't know where it is. According to this view, there exists a specific number of grains, say 10,000, at which a collection becomes a heap, but our ignorance prevents us from identifying it. While this solution preserves the idea of clear-cut distinctions, it feels unsatisfying because it doesn't align with how we experience vagueness in everyday life. Another solution comes from fuzzy logic, which abandons the strict binary of true/false and instead allows for degrees of truth. Under this framework, a group of 50 grains might be 10% heap-like, while 5,000 grains could be 90% heap-like. Fuzzy logic reflects the gradual nature of change, offering a more nuanced way to describe phenomena that resist rigid categorization. However, critics argue that it merely shifts the problem rather than solving it, since assigning percentages still requires arbitrary decisions. A third perspective rejects the premise altogether, suggesting that vague predicates like heap are inherently context-dependent. What counts as a heap depends on the situation, cultural norms, or individual perceptions. For instance, a pile of sand might qualify as a heap in a child's sandbox, but not in a construction site. By emphasizing relativity, this approach highlights the flexibility of language while acknowledging its limitations. Beyond its technical implications, the Sorites Paradox raises profound questions about the nature of reality and human cognition. Why do we insist on drawing lines where none naturally exist? Is it a reflection of our need for order and clarity in an otherwise chaotic world? Or does it reveal a fundamental flaw in the way we construct categories and assign meaning? The paradox also has practical applications, influencing fields like law, ethics, and artificial intelligence. In legal systems, vague terms like reasonable doubt or excessive force pose challenges for interpretation and enforcement. Similarly, ethical dilemmas often hinge on ambiguous thresholds. For example, how much suffering constitutes cruelty? The Sorites Paradox reminds us that precision is elusive, forcing us to navigate gray areas with care and humility. In literature and art, the Sorites Paradox serves as a powerful metaphor for incremental change and cumulative effects. Stories about characters who transform gradually, heroes becoming villains, friends drifting apart, echo the paradox's central theme. Small actions, over time, can lead to dramatic outcomes. Likewise, visual art often plays with gradients and transitions, blurring the lines between light and dark, form and void. Ultimately, the Sorites Paradox invites us to embrace ambiguity rather than fear it. It teaches us that definitions are tools, not absolutes, and that their utility depends on context and purpose. Whether we're debating semantics, designing algorithms, or navigating moral quandaries, the paradox reminds us to tread lightly, recognizing that clarity is often an illusion, and that sometimes the most meaningful answers lie in the spaces between. The Barber Paradox. In a quaint village nestled among rolling hills, there lives a barber with a peculiar reputation. He shaves all and only those men in the village who do not shave themselves. At first glance, this seems straightforward enough, a clever division of labor ensuring everyone stays clean-shaven. But here's the twist. Who shaves the barber? If he shaves himself, then according to his rule, he cannot shave himself. Conversely, if he doesn't shave himself, then he must shave himself. The result is a logical loop with no resolution. This is the Barber Paradox, a thought experiment devised by mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell to illustrate problems with self-reference in set theory. To understand its significance, let's delve deeper into the underlying principles. Imagine the barber as part of two groups, those who shave themselves and those who don't. His role is to serve exclusively the latter group, but his inclusion in either category creates a contradiction, exposing flaws in the system. The paradox mirrors larger issues in mathematics and philosophy, particularly Russell's own work on set theory. In the early 20th century, mathematicians sought to formalize the foundations of mathematics using sets, collections of objects defined by shared properties. However, Russell discovered a fatal flaw. Some sets could contain themselves as members, leading to contradictions akin to the Barber Paradox. For example, consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set include itself? If it does, it violates its own definition. If it doesn't, it should. This conundrum became known as Russell's paradox and shook the foundations of mathematical logic. To resolve such inconsistencies, Russell and others developed new frameworks, including type theory and Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. These approaches imposed restrictions on how sets could be constructed, preventing self-referential loops. While effective, they came at a cost. Simplicity and elegance were sacrificed for rigor and consistency. Outside of mathematics, the Barber Paradox offers insights into social dynamics and organizational structures. Many institutions operate under rules that inadvertently create conflicts of interest or impossible expectations. For instance, imagine a teacher tasked with evaluating all students except those related to faculty members, including their own children. Such scenarios highlight the dangers of poorly designed systems and the importance of anticipating edge cases. On a personal level, the paradox resonates with questions of identity and belonging. Like the barber, we often define ourselves in relation to others, our roles, responsibilities, and relationships shaping who we are. Yet these definitions can trap us in contradictions, forcing us to reconcile competing demands. The paradox reminds us that clarity and coherence are not always compatible, and sometimes we must accept the tension between them. In storytelling, the Barber Paradox serves as a rich source of irony and humor. Characters caught in similar dilemmas, whether literal barbers or metaphorical ones, often embody the absurdity of trying to impose order on chaos. Their struggles reflect universal truths about the human condition, reminding us that life rarely adheres to neat categories. Despite its playful exterior, the Barber Paradox carries weighty implications. It reveals the fragility of systems built on seemingly simple rules and the complexity hidden beneath apparent simplicity. Whether applied to mathematics, society, or personal identity, it challenges us to think critically about the assumptions we take for granted and to recognize the limits of logic in an imperfect world. Zeno's dichotomy paradox. Imagine you're standing at the starting line of a race, ready to sprint toward the finish line. Before you can reach it, however, you must first cover half the distance. Once you've done that, you still have to cover half of the remaining distance, and then half of that distance, and so on, ad infinitum. According to Zeno's dichotomy paradox, you'll never actually reach the finish line because there will always be another half left to traverse. This paradox, attributed to the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, challenges our intuitive understanding of motion and infinity. At its core, it questions whether movement is even possible if space can be infinitely divided. On the surface, it seems absurd. After all, people run races every day without encountering such problems. Yet, Zeno's argument forces us to confront the peculiarities of infinity and the nature of continuity. To unpack this paradox further, consider the mathematical implications. If we break down the journey into an infinite series of smaller and smaller steps, each step takes less time to complete. Theoretically, the sum of these diminishing intervals converges to a finite value, meaning the total time required to finish the race is not infinite. Modern calculus provides tools to resolve this apparent contradiction by showing how infinite sequences can yield finite results. For example, the geometric series backslash RACU plus RAC4 plus RAC8 plus backslash adds up to exactly 1, representing the full distance covered. While mathematics offers a technical resolution, the philosophical implications remain intriguing. Zeno's paradox highlights the tension between discrete and continuous models of reality. Is space fundamentally smooth and divisible, or is it composed of indivisible units? Ancient thinkers like Democritus proposed atomism, the idea that matter, and perhaps space itself, consists of tiny, indivisible particles. If true, this would eliminate the infinite divisibility assumed in Zeno's paradox, providing a physical basis for resolving it. The dichotomy paradox also resonates with broader existential themes. It mirrors the human experience of striving toward goals that often feel perpetually out of reach. Each milestone achieved reveals another horizon beyond it, creating a sense of endless pursuit. Whether chasing success, knowledge, or fulfillment, we frequently find ourselves caught in Zeno's infinite loop, forever approaching but never quite arriving. In literature and art, the paradox serves as a metaphor for the elusiveness of perfection and the complexities of progress. Characters who face insurmountable obstacles or endlessly deferred dreams embody the frustration of trying to cross an unbridgeable gap. Similarly, visual representations of fractals, patterns that repeat infinitely at smaller scales, capture the paradoxical beauty of infinite detail within finite boundaries. Beyond its abstract appeal, Zeno's dichotomy paradox has practical relevance in fields like physics and computer science. In physics, the concept of quantized spacetime suggests that distances may indeed have a smallest possible unit, known as the Planck length. This theoretical limit prevents infinite division, aligning with atomic theories of a universe. In computing, algorithms designed to approximate solutions often rely on iterative methods that mimic Zeno's process of having gaps, demonstrating how ancient philosophy continues to inspire modern innovation. Ultimately, Zeno's dichotomy paradox invites us to marvel at the mysteries of infinity and motion. It reminds us that while logic and mathematics provide powerful tools for understanding the world, they cannot fully capture the richness of lived experience. Like the runner forever approaching the finish line, we are constantly navigating the interplay between theory and practice, precision and approximation, ideal and real.